All right, good morning. Before we begin, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the tragic events that unfolded yesterday in Texas. I think I speak for myself and everyone else at the agency in saying that we are shocked and horrified by the loss of so many lives. And as Connecticut residents, I think this hits us harder than most people. So with that, I did just want to take a moment of silence as we keep the victims close to our hearts and in our thoughts. Okay, thank you. So this hearing before the Connecticut Office of Health Strategy is identified by docket number 2232517 CON pursuant to section 19A-653 of the Connecticut General Statutes. The petitioner in this matter, the Connecticut Office of Health Strategy, issued a notice of civil penalty in the amount of $65,000 to the respondent, Windham Hospital, relating to its alleged failure to seek certificate of need approval under Connecticut General Statutes, section 19A-638, parentheses A, for the termination of inpatient obstetric services. Thereafter, the respondent requested a hearing to contest the imposition of the civil penalty, and OHS issued a notice of hearing. Today is May 25th, 2022. My name is Daniel Chuka. Executive Director Vicky Veltri designated me to be the hearing officer, and I will be issuing the proposed final order in this matter. Also present on behalf of the agency today is Yadira McLaughlin. She's a planning analyst with the agency who may be assisting me from time to time as needed. Public Act number 22-3 authorizes an agency to hold a public hearing by means of electronic equipment in accordance with the Public Act. Any person who participates orally in an electronic meeting shall make a good faith effort to state his or her name and title at the outset of each occasion on which the person participates. I ask that all members of the public at this time mute the device that they are using to access the hearing and silence any additional devices that are around them. This public hearing is held pursuant to Connecticut General Statutes, section 19A-653, and will be conducted under the provisions of Chapter 54 of the General Statutes. The certificate of need process is a regulatory process, and as such, the highest level of respect will be accorded to the petitioner, the respondent, and OHS staff. Our priority is the integrity and the transparency of the process. Accordingly, decorum must be maintained by all present during these proceedings. This hearing is being transcribed and recorded, and the video will also be made available on the OHS website and its YouTube account. All documents related to this hearing that have been or will be submitted to OHS are available for review in our electronic CON portal, which is accessible through our website. Although the hearing is open to the public, as indicated in the agenda, only the petitioner, respondent, OHS, and their respective representatives will be allowed to make comments unless one of the parties requests the testimony of other individuals. Accordingly, the chat feature in this Zoom call has been disabled. As this hearing is being held virtually, we ask that anyone speaking, to the extent possible, enable the use of video cameras, and anyone else, as I mentioned before, should mute their device. Lastly, as Zoom hopefully notified you in the course of entering the meeting, I just wanted to point out that by appearing on camera, you are consenting to being filmed if you wish to revoke your consent, you can do so at this time. The CON portal contains the table of record in this case. It was uploaded yesterday afternoon. As of this morning, exhibits were identified from A to Q. I understand that the respondent filed a request to strike a portion of Exhibit J, which was refiled with Bates numbering and a corrected date as Exhibit P. It appears that the petitioner at this time has not yet filed a response. So I would just like to address that first. Counsel for the petitioner, would you please identify yourself for the record and spell your name?
Yes, my name is Lara Manzione, L-A-R-A, Manzione, M-A-N-Z-I-O-N-E. I represent the Office of Health Strategy this morning.
Thank you.
And I thought we could address the issue, their motion to strike, before we proceed.
Before we do that, I just wanted to have counsel for the respondent identify herself, and if she had anything else to add to her request to strike, I would ask that she say that at this time.
Yes, good morning, Attorney Chuka. This is Jennifer Fusco, counsel for the respondent, Windham Hospital. It's Jennifer, J-E-N-N-I-F-E-R, Fusco, F-U-S-C-O. I think we've put into our written submission most of what we want to say, but my understanding is that the CON application is being introduced for the sole purpose of providing evidence of the date on which it was filed, which is something that the respondent is willing to concede to, and Ms. Hanley will speak to that in her testimony. I think we've made a concerted effort to separate the certificate of need docket from the civil penalty docket because the issues really are completely different in each. This is more of a procedural hearing, if you will, versus the substantive issues that are arising in the CON proceeding. Here, OHS needs to prove that the elements of 19A 653 have been met, which is basically whether there was a CON activity for which the applicant willfully failed or the respondent willfully failed to request a CON. And I don't believe that all of the information in the CON application in docket number, 232394, is required to do that. It also introduces into the record of this matter a considerable amount of irrelevant information that I think might confuse the issues before the hearing officer. So for those reasons, we're asking that it be stricken.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Manzione, did you want to be heard?
Yes, please. I disagree with counsel's position. I think that the underlying docket is not submitted solely for the purpose of the fact that it was submitted on the date of September 3rd, 2020. There are many pieces of information in that complete application that are relevant, and I believe that the hearing officer can make his way through without being confused and without being distracted by anything that may be so-called irrelevant by opposing counsel. There are lots of financial documents there that some of which I'm going to rely on or refer to. There are corporate structure. There is corporate structure information that is useful to understanding this proceeding. There is also general background information about the underlying circumstances that give rise to this penalty hearing this morning. So I think there is no harm that will be generated by keeping the CON application in its entirety as part of the record. As I would also note that in terms of information that might be confusing or irrelevant, generally the hearing officer takes administrative notice of all sorts of things, other dockets, the APCD database, other kinds of financial filings that are part of the HRS system, the hospital reporting system in the Office of Health Strategy. And I think this is just one more piece of information in the puzzle that will help the hearing officer make a complete and fully informed decision about the appropriateness of the imposition of the civil penalty on Windham Hospital today.
Okay.
If I can respond just briefly, I will point the hearing officer to your May 5th order, which does require both parties here to pre-file all information that they intend to present at the hearing. And although the CON application itself was pre-filed, Mr. Lazarus's narrative testimony does not speak to any of the issues that Attorney Manzione just mentioned. So to the extent that Mr. Lazarus is going to be offering substantive pre-file on issues around financials and various things, I would object to that, given that that was not pre-filed as required by your order.
I think I'm going to allow it to stay in for the time being. I don't see the harm in keeping it in at this point. And I am familiar with that entire docket, the CON application, because I've been designated the hearing officer for that one. So I feel as though I'll be able to, keep the two separate. And I do have a very good understanding of what the issues are in both of these different proceedings. To the extent that Ms. Manzione anticipates asking Mr. Lazarus questions about anything in what was pre-filed, if you have objections, we can deal with those as they arise.
Understood.
So with that in mind, are there any other objections to the exhibits that have been identified in the table of record at this point?
The respondent has no objections. I assume you're going to deal with administrative notices once we handle objections to the record, or would you like to discuss those now?
I was planning to get to the administrative notice after we identified what was in the record and dealt with those objections.
So the respondent has no objections to the substantive information in the record. I would just like to point out that the name of the respondent is incorrect. It's listed as Windham Hospital Foundation, Inc., which is not the entity that operates Windham Hospital. It should be Windham Community Memorial Hospital, Inc., correct? Yeah.
Okay, I apologize for that. That was my error.
Yeah, that could just be corrected to reflect the correct entity.
Sure.
And can you please repeat that, the official name of the respondent?
Sure, it's Windham Community Memorial Hospital, Incorporated.
Windham Community Memorial Hospital, Incorporated. Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
apologize if I've been one of the ones using the incorrect, and I will do my best. Sometimes I just say Windham Hospital, but I will try, if you prefer, I will try to say Windham Community Memorial Hospital.
No, and it's fine just to say Windham Hospital, but the Windham Hospital Foundation is a separate legal entity. So we just wanted to make sure that that wasn't referenced here, but feel free to call it Windham Hospital.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. McLaughlin, are there any additional exhibits to enter at this time?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, I would like to thank my opposing counsel and the hearing officer for your flexibility in accepting documents that weren't Bates filed, and then that were Bates filed, and for accepting an update, correction of one of the pieces of testimony that had a significant typo in it. And so thank you for pointing that out and for allowing us the flexibility to resubmit those. And so we have hopefully a cleaner and a more easily referable set of documents.
Thank you. And for anyone watching, I think the main documents that are going to be referred to in this hearing are Exhibit I, Exhibit K, Exhibit O, and Exhibit P. I believe those are the final versions of the party's submissions that were put on the record. Moving on to administrative notice, in accordance with Connecticut General Statute, Section 4-178, the parties are hereby noticed that I may take administrative notice of the following documents: the statewide healthcare facilities and services plan, the facilities and services inventory, the OHS acute care hospital discharge database, hospital reporting system, that's HRS, financial and utilization data, all payer claims database claims data. I don't expect to have to refer to any of those in the course of these proceedings because, as respondents' counsel noted, this is more a procedural issue than it is a substantive one, but it is possible that those will come up in the course of these proceedings. So I just wanted to note that on the record. I am also taking administrative notice of the following OHS dockets. These are all listed in either the respondents or the petitioner's filings. I believe they are mostly in the respondents' filings, the hospital's filings. So it's docket number 20-32394-CON. That's Windham Hospital's application to terminate OB services. Docket number 15-31998-CON. That's Milford Hospital's termination of OB services. Docket number 15-32014-CON, which is Sharon Hospital's termination of its sleep center. Docket number 04-30297-DTR, which relates to Lawrence and Memorial Hospital's suspension of angioplasty. Docket number 04-30272-DTR, that is John Dempsey Hospital's suspension of its bone marrow transplant program. Docket number 03-23013-DTR, which is Yale New Haven Hospital's suspension of its liver transplant program. And finally, docket number 12-31707-CON, which is the civil penalty proceeding regarding Greenwich Hospital's dental clinic. Certainly, if there are any others that I missed that are in either of the parties' filings, I will also be taking administrative notices of those as well. It's probably not necessary that I take administrative notice of those, given that they are part of the record, but I just wanted to put that on the record as well. So do either of the parties have any additional exhibits they would like to enter onto the record at this time? Or is there anything else that I should be taking administrative notice of that either of you are aware of? And I'll start with you, Ms. Manzione. Is there anything else? Okay.
No, thank you.
Okay, I was going to say the transcriptionist can't pick up on facial nods and things. So, so how about for the respondent? Is there anything else?
There's nothing to add at this time. I did just want to note that we are reserving our right to submit a post-hearing legal brief, which I know you said we would discuss toward the end of the hearing.
Yes.
But other than that, nothing.
Okay. So with that, we will proceed in the order established in the hearing agenda, which was published, I believe, about a week ago. So starting first with the petitioner, OHS, is there an opening statement, Ms. Manzione?
Yes, there is, Attorney Chuka. I am just getting ready. I try to be as paper-free as possible. but I have paper in the back because sometimes my technology does not agree with me. If we're ready, may it please the court. Good morning. Hearing Officer Chuka, Attorney Fusco, representatives of Windham Hospital and the Office of Health Strategy, members of the healthcare community and other interested parties. My name is Lara Manzione and I represent the Office of Health Strategy. This morning I have one task. I'm going to present testimony and evidence that prove that Windham Hospital knowingly and willfully terminated its inpatient obstetric services without first obtaining a certificate of need. I'm going to further prove that by not obtaining a CON before terminating these essential medical OB services, Windham Hospital broke the law. The consequences for breaking this law are being widely felt throughout the Windham community, a community that can no longer rely on the security of having a local hospital ready when they are to deliver a baby. But we can't do anything about that this morning because all that is at issue this morning is the legal consequence for breaking the law, namely the imposition of a $65,000 civil penalty. Now, $65,000 may seem like a large amount of money to a family that gets by on $65,000 per year, but the evidence will show that Windham Hospital had a total margin of approximately 2% in 2020, or $2.4 million. And in 2021, the hospital's total margin was 6.3%, or $8.3 million. A penalty of $65,000 is only 2.7% of 2020's total margin, while a penalty of $65,000 is only 0.8% of 2021's larger total margin, less than 1%, a tiny blip in comparison. A margin is similar to profits in a for-profit entity. In a nonprofit entity, like Windham Hospital, a margin is the difference between what it takes in revenue less its expenses. A civil penalty of $65,000 compared to a total margin of $8.3 million is less than 1%. Getting back to the law and the certificates of need, Section 19A-653 of the Connecticut General Statutes states that if a healthcare facility or institution that is required to file a CON under Section 19A-638 willfully fails to seek a CON approval for any of the activities in Section 19A-638, they shall be subject to a civil penalty of up to $1,000 per day for each such day such health care facility or institution conducts any of the described activities without certificate of need approval as required by Section 19A-638. Now that's quite a mouthful, so I'm going to break it down. And the evidence presented today will show that Windham Hospital broke this law and must pay a penalty, a civil penalty for doing so. So under Connecticut General Statute, Section 19A-653, the Office of Health Strategy has the burden of proof to show that Windham Hospital was required to file a CON before it terminated an inpatient service, specifically obstetrics. OHS also has the burden of proof to show that Windham Hospital did in fact terminate obstetric services, and that Windham Hospital did not file a CON before it terminated the OB services. And finally, and most importantly, that Windham Hospital knew it was required to file a CON. In other words, that it willfully failed to file the CON before terminating the inpatient services. Today, the evidence will show that, yes, Windham Hospital was required to file a CON. Under Connecticut General Statutes 19A-638 sub A sub 5, Windham Hospital was required to apply for a CON because it was terminating an inpatient hospital service, namely obstetric services, as of July 1, 2020. The evidence will show that the board of directors of the parent organization of Windham Hospital actually had a meeting where they affirmatively decided to terminate Windham Hospital's obstetric services. The minutes from that board meeting on June 16th, 2020, verify that the vote to close Windham Hospital's obstetrics department was made unanimously. The evidence will also show that Windham Hospital sent a letter to its prenatal patients indicating that as of July 1st, 2020, that pregnant women will no longer be able to give birth at Windham Hospital and that they should make alternative plans by delivering at Bacchus Hospital in Norwich or at a different hospital of their choice. The evidence will further show that Windham Hospital did not file a CON before July 1st, 2020, the date Windham Hospital terminated obstetric services, but rather the hospital filed a CON on September 3rd, 2020, more than 2 months after it actually terminated the obstetric services. And finally, as to the question of whether Windham Hospital knew it was required to file a CON, or in other words, did it willfully fail to file a CON? The evidence will show that yes, Windham Hospital knew that it was required to file a CON. The evidence will show that the president of Windham Hospital was specifically told by the Department of Public Health that Windham Hospital would need to file a CON before terminating the inpatient service of obstetrics. And the evidence will show that Hartford Healthcare / Windham Hospital circulated a flyer for a virtual public meeting to be held on August 10th, 2020, that would discuss Windham Hospital's proposal to discontinue childbirth services. The flyer also stated that this proposal is subject to regulatory approval and that the hospital plans to submit a CON application, indicating that Windham Hospital knew that it needed to submit a CON, and yet it still hadn't. Now, let's return to the statutory language once more and break down what's required to impose a civil penalty under CGS section 19A-653. Once again, the Office of Health Strategy has the burden of proof to show what date to use to begin and end counting for the imposition of the daily penalty. CGS section 19A-653 reads in pertinent part that the institution shall be subject to a civil penalty of up to $1,000 per day for each day such healthcare facility or institution conducts any of the described activities without certificate of need approval as required by section 19A-638. Since the evidence will show that the first date Windham Hospital began operating after terminating the OB services without CON approval was July 1st, 2020, that is the date the penalty should begin. And since the evidence will show that the CON application was filed on September 3rd, 2020, that is the date when the violation should end. Therefore, the penalty should be assessed for that entire time period of 60 days. I'm sorry, excuse me, 65 days. In summary, the Office of Health Strategy has the burden to prove, and the evidence will show that Windham Hospital terminated its obstetric services as of July 1, 2020. The evidence will show that Windham Hospital knew it needed to file a CON to terminate these services, and it willfully did not seek a CON until more than 2 months later. The evidence will show that OHS correctly imposed a civil penalty of $1,000 per day for each day after July 1st, 2020, until the hospital filed a CON with the Office of Health Strategy on September 3rd, 2020, for a total of 65 days and $65,000. We ask that the hearing officer uphold this penalty. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you please identify all the individuals by name and title who you plan to have testify on behalf of OHS today?
I only plan to have Stephen W. Lazarus testify.
Okay.
He is here. He can spell his name and
Okay.
anything else you need to have about him.
Mr. Lazarus, looks like you're muted. There you go. Can you please state your name and spell it and your title as well?
Sure. Good morning. My name is Stephen Lazarus, Steven Lazarus, and my title at OHS is Operations Manager.
Okay. So I'm going to swear you in now. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or solemnly and sincerely affirm, as the case may be, that the evidence you provided in your pre-file and the evidence that you shall give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, or upon penalty of perjury?
I do.
And do you also adopt your pre-file testimony as your testimony here today?
Yes, I do adopt my pre-file testimony.
Thank you. So Ms. Manzione, you can proceed at this time.
Thank you, Attorney Chuka. I would just like to walk Mr. Lazarus through his pre-file testimony, not reading it, just highlighting a few of the key points and referring to some of the documents that are listed in the pre-file testimony. So bear with us. I think we've got it worked out. We might need to point out which document we're talking about, but we'll go through this. Okay, so good morning, Steve.
Good morning.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I did just want to point out that I am going to allow cross-examination and redirect if necessary. So
Very good. Okay, we will be prepared for that. Thank you. Okay, Steve, good morning. Please tell me a little bit about yourself and your work history at the Office of Health Strategy.
I work with Office of Health Strategy and its predecessor agencies, including Office of Health Care Access, Department of Public Health, for probably now over a total of 26 years. And currently I am acting as the CON supervisor for the CON program.
Okay, and where do you fall in the hierarchy at OHS?
Well, currently I report to Kimberly Martin, who's the deputy director of the agency.
Okay, and with respect to CON, who do you oversee? How does the CON department, what is it made up of?
Sure. The CON program is actually made up of 5 staff members. They range in titles from research analyst, planning analyst, or healthcare analyst. And they also they review the applications that come in that get filed with the agency, and they perform their reviews and they also review the CON determinations that come in.
Okay. You said that you were operations manager, so that sounds broader than just CON. What else do you do at OHS besides your work with CON?
So I also run work groups, healthcare related work groups. So I run, currently I'm running and co-chairing one of the work groups that has to do with physician group practices. I've also run groups in the past that have to do with the cardiac guidelines that are present in the OHS's facilities plan, facility and services plan. And I've also ran work groups for the imaging work group as well. Beyond that, I also oversee all the portals within OHS. We probably have about 6 or 7 that actually are outwardly facing, including the CON portal. And I have a team members that are made up of various members from the different units that are actually admins within that I hold meetings, I run through those, and I see if there's any issues, enhancements, things that need to be done, and I act as a liaison. I work with the IT to ensure that they run smoothly.
And you mentioned a CON portal. What is the CON portal?
So the CON portal is a database that has 2 faces, one to the outside, one to the inside. And basically it allows applicants to file their applications as well as CON determinations via the portal, as well as payments. We receive them, we accept them, we process them. Most of the communication that takes place, official communications such as completeness letters, decisions, applications, all including the filing, all original filings, they must go through the CON portal. And that's also acts as a original file holder for the CON program and all the CON files. And public can access those, but only limited to viewing only, and probably downloading the documents, but they cannot change or do anything to the documents. The only person that can do is the contact person for the entity and the staff members on this side.
Okay, great. I've made lots of use of this CON portal, and I'm sure other people in this room have as well, in this virtual room. What can you tell me about, or what do you know about Windham Hospital and its efforts or its intentions to terminate its inpatient obstetric services?
Okay. So I wasn't directly
anything.
involved, but I did hear, I know that, the application, Windham had terminated wanted to terminate its OB services when it filed a CON application with the Office of Health Strategy, and that was on September 3rd, 2020. And that was via the CON portal itself.
Okay. And what kind of information what kind of basic information can be learned from the CON application?
Well, CON application has different components to it. Right up front, we find out who the applicant is, who the parent corporation is, who the contact person is, their contact information as well. Further along, you can have, there are questions that every applicant has to address that talks about the specific project and the various criteria that are required under 639. And we also have a financial information that's submitted as part of it. The forms do get revised, but one of the application components is the Excel spreadsheet, the financial worksheet that's also submitted. And the application was updated probably in the last fall to include some financial indicators.
Okay. Does the CON application ask about an applicant's parent corporation?
Yes, it does.
Do you know who Windham Hospital's parent corporation is?
Yes, Hartford Healthcare.
Okay. And does it also ask about a applicant's tax status?
Yes, it does. It asks if you're for-profit or not-for-profit.
And do you know what Windham checked off?
Windham
Hospital checked off?
Windham is not-for-profit.
Okay. And do you know who was named as the contact person on the Windham Hospital application?
Barbara Dirty.
And do you know what her role is?
Well, beyond being a contact person, I believe she's the VP
Or what her
of
title
planning.
is?
I believe she's the VP of planning, and among other things at Hartford Healthcare.
Okay, that sounds good. That's all I wanted to know about the CON. So let's go back to the process. So once the CON application is uploaded via the CON portal, what happens to it?
It's typically signed a docket number. In this case, we had signed it a docket number 20-32394-CON. The CON application indicates that it's the CON application. If it was a DTR, it would be a determination, and W for a waiver, and so on and so forth. Once the application is submitted, it's then reviewed by the analyst, and we have 30 days to review the initial application from the date of the initial filing. Then the completeness letter, which is a document that's sent out typically to the applicants requesting any additional information prior to the application being able to be deemed complete.
Okay. And what was an analyst assigned to this application?
Yes, the analyst that was assigned to this application was Lindsay Dotson. She's no longer with OHS. So she had done the initial review for this application.
Okay, and what was the first communication between the analyst and Windham Hospital?
The analyst was the initial CON completeness letter that was put together, that was sent out. However, in this case, I believe there was also some information that was brought to OHS's attention that prompted it to start the inquiry.
So you said that, was there some letter before even the initial completeness letter? Is that true?
There was some communication that prompted some information to OHS or got OHS to start the inquiry process.
And do you know what that trigger was?
I don't know what the trigger was, particularly in this one. Generally, it's either a phone call to the office, it could be an email, or it could be a letter. But I don't know particularly what was in this case.
And would that information generally be included in the file?
In the inquiry file, if it was a official letter, somebody has requested to start, it may be included. I don't know, to be precise. It depends on the person inquiring and what means that it came in on. So I don't know the precise answer.
Did you receive some kind of question about this file that caused the earlier inquiry regarding this docket? Did
No,
you personally receive?
I did not.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about that inquiry. That inquiry that triggered a letter that OHS sent out. That is in my pre-filed documents. I would like you to turn your attention to what has previously been marked as, well, it's in the overall exhibit for, Roy, can you help me here, please? So the overall exhibit for this case, this hearing is it P? My pre-file with Bates numbering?
Yeah, give me one moment. I'm just looking up the
Yeah.
inquiry letter itself.
Yeah, the inquiry letter is, I believe,
It's Exhibit
within
B,
that is
beginning
Exhibit
on
B.
page 100 with the cover letter of Exhibit B. And it is
Right.
a 2-page letter from analyst Lindsay Donston to
Okay.
Windham Hospital and Harvard Healthcare.
Steve, do you have that? And
I do have it up.
Attorney Fusco and Windham Hospital folks, are you able to follow along? Can you locate that letter?
I do have it. Yes, I believe it's Bates 101.
Bates 100 or
100
101? Okay.
Yes, we have it.
Yeah, so it's a letter dated September 18th,
Yes.
2020. Okay. So Steve, I would like you to characterize the letter, who it's from, who it's to, and then read question number 3.
Sure. The letter is actually on OHS's letterhead. It's sent out by Lindsay Donston. That was the healthcare analyst assigned to it. And question number 3, you said?
Yes.
Okay. So the letter is inquiring additional information regarding the termination of inpatient obstetrical services at Windham Hospital. Question 3 states, when was the decision made to divert obstetrical services at the hospital? If the date of the decision predates the publication of a notice of hospital's intent to file a CON application to terminate obstetrical services, indicate why the hospital application was not filed earlier.
Okay. And so now we're going to try to find the answer to that question in our records. So the answer to that letter is marked, I believe, my exhibit C.
And it's on Bates page 107 is the response to question 3.
And the response to that question, thank you, Roy, is on page 107. So the response to question 3 is on page 7. Okay.
Yes, I see it.
Okay, so why don't you please read the part after it says response, colon. It starts out with the decision.
Sure. The decision was made on June 20th, 2020, to again temporarily interrupt obstetric services while seeking regulatory approval from OHS to terminate these services.
Period. Thank you.
Period.
I would like you to go a little bit further now down into the next paragraph that said that starts public notice of the hospital's intent. And then there's some dates. And then there's a sentence that begins the hospital. Would you please read the rest of that sentence that begins the hospital?
Sure. The hospital used the time between June 20th, 2020 and July 8th, 2020 to contact all community stakeholders, including local legislators, to discuss the circumstances at the hospital and the ultimate decision to seek regulatory approval to officially terminate the service.
Okay, great. We can put that document away for now. Thank you. And we'll go back to the regular process. So among other things that were talked about in that inquiry letter, there were other questions asked and answered. And then you mentioned something called a completeness letter 1. What does a completeness letter 1 generally do? What is its purpose?
The purpose of the completeness letter, whether it's first or second, is to, well, the first one is actually based on the review of the application that was sent in initially. And based off that, any information that OHS or the analyst deems important and that's either missing or they need additional clarification, additional evidence on, they would include questions in there. And that would be sent to the applicant to respond.
Okay. And was there a completeness letter in this case?
Yes, there was.
Okay, and I believe that's been marked as in the subsection of my entry in the pre-file documents. It's my exhibit F. It has some questions, and then the response to the questions is been marked exhibit G. I'd like to ask you about a question and answer from that completeness letter 1. It might be easiest just to look at the question and answer together on the response. So on document G, which is Bates stamped, I believe it's number 126, and it's question 2. And before we read the letter, read that answer to that question, would you characterize, please, to who from, what it's about, this document, exhibit G?
So this is their completeness. This is the hospital, Windham Hospital's response to OHS's completeness letter 1.
Okay. And so can you please flip to question number, I mean, these are long questions with multiple parts. Can you please flip to question number 2, which I think is marked Bates number 126.
Yes, I'm there.
Read the question and then the response, please.
Sure. Question 2 describe the transportation plan the hospital plans to implement. A, how will the patients access these transportation services? Question mark. Response. For the majority of women who receive their care at hospitals' prenatal care, parentheses, which will remain operational, close parentheses, comma, planning for a safe and patient-focused delivery begins with the first visit. Transportation options are discussed with each patient well in advance of the anticipated delivery date to ensure that all patients have information they need, including phone numbers and contact information for each transportation service. In addition, patients are coached by their provider to call Bacchus Hospital and or 911 to ensure patients are certain about what they need to do when they are in labor or need immediate medical attention. The hospital will coordinate and provide transportation via local ambulance service at no cost to the patient. Would you like me to continue?
Yes, please.
Sure. Please see
Just one more paragraph.
Okay. Please see transportation plan for Windham Hospital's obstetrics patients attached as Exhibit 1. The hospital has made arrangements with American Ambulance to transport patients to either Bacchus Hospital or another hospital, providing that the patient has made arrangements in advance with the receiving physician at the other hospital and their admission is expected. The arrangements with other hospitals are made with prenatal clinic patients as they plan for their deliveries over the course of their pregnancies.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I would like you to now flip ahead in that document. There is something attached to the letter. It's marked Exhibit 2. It's a copy. It's called a copy of the hospital's communications to patients. It is OHS pre-file Bates page number 136. Do you see that?
Where is it located again? I'm sorry.
So it's still in, it should be not too far away because it's an attachment to that letter from what you just read. It's
Okay.
It was an attachment to that letter. And if
scroll
you
down.
follow the Bates stamps for OHS pre-file, it's Bates stamps 136. This is a letter that starts, "Dear patient."
Yes, Exhibit 2, page 136. Yes, I have it.
Did you see it?
It's on Hartford Healthcare.
Okay, can you please characterize the letter, describe who it's from, who it's to, letterhead, and then I'm gonna ask you to read a little bit of it.
Sure. It's a letter Actually, it's on Hartford Healthcare, Windham Hospital's letterhead. It's a letter to patients. It's actually a form letter, it appears. It's like a dear patient letter,
And who's it from?
providing them, and it's signed by Daryl Harlick, RN, who is the Regional Director of Women Health Services, and David Kella, MD, Regional Medical Director, Women Health Services for
Okay,
Hartford Healthcare.
I'd like you, thank you. I'd like you to read the first two sentences of the letter, just after the dear patient.
Sure. We want to let you know that birthing services at Windham Hospital will be provided at Bacchus Hospital's Birthing Center in Norwich starting July 1, 2020. We are sharing this information so you can make plans for delivering your baby at Bacchus Hospital or at a hospital of your choice.
Okay, so if you're a patient reading this letter, I know you're a recent dad. So what if my choice is I want to have my baby at Windham Hospital on July 15th? Is that an option for me?
From this paragraph, it doesn't appear to be, no.
Yeah, I'm going to object to the question for the record. I mean, this is not a letter that Mr. Lazarus received, and his characterization of what it means is not appropriate.
Okay, let's move on. All right, and okay, we will move on. Now, one other point that that letter did make what was the point of the letter that was in bold print multiple times?
It's directing the patient to giving them options as to how to proceed if they for a delivery at Bacchus Hospital. It directs them what to do, and it says for delivery at an alternate hospital, then it gives them alternate options.
And what about if someone needed immediate medical attention?
It says to call 911.
Okay. And that's regardless of whether you're doing,
Whether it goes to
regardless
Bacchus
of your
or
hospital.
right.
Okay. Okay. So once again, what was the date that the birthing services were going to be provided at Bacchus Hospital again in the first sentence?
July 1, 2020.
Okay, July 1. So let's come back to your role at CON. Do you ever talk with hospitals or healthcare facilities that are going through the CON process?
Yes, some or many reach out to us when they're about to do a proposal. Sometimes when they want advice and what to do and how to proceed.
Okay, and would you say that if a hospital or a healthcare facility comes to you that they're going to do make a significant change in their services, what advice might you give them in order to make it a smoother transition?
Typically, we let them know, because as far as we get a lot of concern from the community, is to always start off with the community first. Share the information, have a plan in place, and then share that plan with the community, either through forums, websites, or a combination of those, and just to educate the community of what the change might be coming. That's typically
Okay.
part of our advice to generally every major change coming to a hospital.
Did you reach out to Windham Hospital, or was Windham Hospital, did they reach out to you to ask for advice or to give advice about this proposal of terminating services?
To me directly, no,
You personally?
no.
Okay. So I am going to show you a document, or I'm going to ask you to look at a document. Now, this is a document that is, I'm trying to recall. So it is attached. It's attached to a letter from Attorney Fusco to Executive Director Veltri dated November 9th, 2021. I believe it has to do with the Shaw letter. I believe it's in part of Attorney Fusco's submissions. I think it's Bates stamped page 366. Roy, you helped me find where this was before.
So it's Exhibit V, uploaded to the portal on November 9th, 2021, as part of Docket 32394, which is Windham Hospital's CON application. And it is Bates page 366 is the flyer that I believe you are referring to.
Okay. So Attorney Fusco and
Can you give me a moment to find it? It's in the
Sure.
CON application. What page? What Bates number?
366.
Yeah, we don't have, these would be your exhibits. What's your Bates number? This 366 would have been the application Bates number. I'm.
Yeah, the application Bates number.
I don't
No,
have that
it's,
here.
no, it's not part of, it's not part of the, I don't believe it's part of the CON application. It's an attachment to a letter sent from Attorney Fusco to Executive Director Veltri on November 9th, 2021.
I'm familiar
in-
with, I'm sorry, I'm
It's-
sorry to interrupt. I'm familiar with the letter. I just don't know where it is in this docket that we're dealing with
Yeah.
today.
I'm trying to, I know it's in this, I know it's in this docket somewhere. It's attached as Exhibit A to this letter. So hold on, we will find it. Let me pull up the record. It's in the middle part.
Are you
I thought I
referring
had
to,
everything else.
are you referring to the forum invitation?
Yes, the attachment is the virtual public meeting invitation.
Yes,
And
that,
it's attached as an,
I think it might be
it's attached as an exhibit.
something. I'm
That's
not
the only way I saw it. I
probably, it's
thought I
probably,
had everything all lined up.
it's okay. It's probably, oh, here it is.
Hold on.
It's Bates page 43 of Donna Hanley's testimony.
Oh, we have, yeah, I apologize. I don't mean to make you go
Okay.
searching for things, but, okay, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So, okay, so this is the, okay, so I'm gonna ask you a couple questions about this flyer. Now that I'm screwed up my computer screen, hold on, let's see if I can pull everybody back. Okay, so just so we're making sure we're on the same page, Steve,
Yes.
can you describe the flyer? to make sure we're talking about the same flyer.
So there's a colorful flyer with the Hartford Healthcare Windham logo on the top right side. On the left side, it says Windham Hospital to host a virtual in orange. And then in purple says public meeting on childbirth services. And then it.
Okay, is that the same flyer that you have, Attorney Fusco and
Yes,
Windham Hospital
yes.
team? Yeah, okay. There are, okay, there's a couple sentences on here that I've highlighted that I'd like you to read, Steve. So, but before we do that, Steve, this kind of flyer, what do you think, or what is the purpose of this flyer?
It appears to be an announcement flyer for the public regarding a virtual forum.
And what date is the virtual forum?
According to the flyer, August 10th, 2020.
Okay. And according to the flyer, you know, the first two sentences, what will be discussed? You can read from the flyer.
Sure. Which
So you
portion?
can read after it says open to the public.
Open to the public. Please join us for a discussion about the future of childbirth services at Windham Hospital. Windham Hospital leaders will discuss their proposal to discontinue childbirth services while enhancing overall women's health services. The hospital will also discuss how community residents will access childbirth services in the future. They'll plan to continue prenatal and postpartum care and other service enhancements.
And just read the one following sentence after that dotted line, please.
This proposal is subject to regulatory approval, and the hospital plans to submit a certificate of need application to the Office of Health Strategy in the coming weeks, period.
Okay, thank you. So just to recap, this flyer appears to be from an event in August of 2020.
Yes.
Okay, so that would have happened before the CON was filed, because when was the CON application filed again?
September 8th, let's see, September 3rd, 2020.
Okay. So the CON is filed, the completeness letter happens, the response, there's some back and forth. How do you know when the back and forth with the letters is completed? How do you know when it's time to move on to the next step?
Once completeness letters, either one or two or whatever, however many we have, I believe in this case there were two. Once OHS is satisfied that we have enough evidence and we can deem the application complete, that's the next step. And that's what the application would have been done, is deemed complete.
Do you know when this file was deemed complete?
I believe it was deemed complete on February 25th, 2021.
Okay. And then there were a bunch of procedural occurrences, and we will skip most of those. And then there was a letter was sent out about civil penalty. Okay.
Yes.
And did I leave anything out that you want to mention about this case or about this filing, or anything that you think is important to say that you'd like to?
No, I think we covered everything related to the process and what was in my testimony.
Okay, then I am done with this witness. But stay
Good.
here, you might be having other questions.
I'm sure.
Just a few. Is it okay, Attorney Chuka, for me to proceed with cross-examination?
Yes, that's fine.
Thanks. Good morning, Steve. Is it okay if I call you Steve, Mr.
Absolutely.
Lazarus? Thank you.
Steve is fine, thank you.
So you testified today that you've been with OHS and its predecessor agency, the Office of Healthcare Access, for more than 26 years, correct?
Yes,
And historically, during that time, you did work as a CON analyst, correct? Including as the principal analyst during
yes,
a period of time.
yes,
Am I correct that between September of 2019 and September of 2020, your title was operations manager?
yes,
So during that time, you were not overseeing the day-to-day of the CON unit, correct? That was being done by Brian Carney, the CON unit supervisor?
yes, but my role, I was still guiding CONs with the process piece. That was still part of my responsibility, so I would guide, Brian and the CON team as needed, but not the
Okay.
day-to-day operations.
Okay, fair enough. And you didn't assume the role, you didn't assume Brian's role really until he retired in March of 2022, correct?
Yes, I'm currently acting in this, but I haven't assumed the role fully, yes. Just clarifying.
Like you, right? So I think you testified under direct that you yourself had no conversations with anyone from Windham Hospital or Hartford Healthcare about their obstetric services and their plan to file a CON application, correct?
Correct.
Were you aware before September of 2020, before September 3rd of 2020, that Kimberly Martone, who I believe you said is your direct report from OHS, had spoken with Barbara Dirty about the Windham OB service on November 1st, 2019?
No,
You were not aware of that. And you were not on that call with Ms. Martone and Ms. Dirty, correct?
I don't believe so, no.
And the particulars of that call were never communicated to you in your position as operations manager?
No,
Okay. Were you aware, or kind of the same question, were you aware before September 3rd of 2020 that Ms. Dirty had contacted Ms. Martone in late June or early July of 2020 to tell her that Windham was about to publish the notice of intent to file the CON application?
correct. I wasn't aware.
Okay. Were you aware, and I'm not certain how this works at OHS, but were you aware that the notice of intent to file the CON application was published in the Chronicle on July 8th, 9th, and 10th of 2020? In real time, I guess is my question.
No, I don't believe so.
Okay,
We don't get real-time information that's been published.
okay, okay. Were you aware that Leslie Greer of OHS had been invited as sort of a representative of OHS to attend a virtual public forum hosted by Windham about the OB service closure in August of 2020, about the proposed closure?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. So I guess it's fair to say, and I think you said this at the beginning of this line of questioning, that you were not directly involved with any of the preliminary discussions and notifications made to OHS by Windham Hospital regarding the proposed termination of OB services, correct?
Correct.
You mentioned in your testimony that Lindsay Donston, who was the initial analyst on this, on the Windham OB CONs, no longer with OHS, correct?
Right.
And Mr. Carney, who was overseeing the CON unit day to day when, in the year leading up to the filing of the CON, has since retired, correct?
Yes.
And Attorney Michaela Mitchell, who served as the hearing officer on the Windham OB-CON, has since resigned and moved out of state, correct?
Unfortunately, yes.
You're the only one left, Steve. Okay, you testified in some detail about an inquiry that was initiated by OHS in September of 2020 after the CON application had been filed concerning whether the hospital preemptively discontinued obstetric services without CON authorization, correct?
Yes.
And one of my questions, which I think you may have answered, is that the letter says, or the inquiry letter says, that OHS was in receipt of certain information, but you don't know what that information is, correct?
Correct.
And you don't know if that information was ever relayed to Hartford Healthcare or Windham Hospital?
I have no knowledge of it, no.
Would you be able to access that information in reviewing the file?
I've reviewed the file. I didn't see it in there.
Okay. I want to take you back to page, I'm sorry to be jumping around in these Bates numbers, but I think it's page 107 of the exhibits to your testimony. it was the response to the inquiry letter that Attorney Manzione had you reading from.
Okay.
Just let me know when you're there.
107. Okay. Almost there. Okay, I'm on page 107.
So question 3, response, Attorney Manzione had you read the first sentence. I'd like you, if you could, to read the
Sure.
first 3 sentences of that first paragraph.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Response to question 3, right?
Yes.
Okay. The decision was made on June 20th, 2020 to again temporarily interrupt obstetric services while seeking regulatory approval from OHS to terminate these services. The decision was made on this date because the one physician providing obstetrical services at the hospital took paid time off for vacation, and the hospital was not able to provide call coverage for this leave. In addition, the loss of nursing staff and the hospital's inability to secure nursing resources either through employment or with locums makes the safe reopening of the unit not possible. Please
Okay,
see
thank-
response. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And in the next paragraph, I think Attorney Manzione had you read the first sentence about the public notice being filed on July 8th, 9th, and 10th. Can you read the sentence after that that begins with the hospital used?
Sure. The hospital used the time between June 20th, 2020 and July 8th, 2020 to contact all community stakeholders, including local legislators, to discuss the circumstances at the hospital that the ultimate decision to seek regulatory approval to officially terminate the service.
Okay, thank you. So this response was submitted on, I believe, October 2nd, 2020, if I have the date right. Yeah, so this was submitted on October 2nd, 2020, which was more than a year and a half ago. Are you aware that the Office of Health Strategy has not to date responded to this inquiry?
I have not. No.
Okay. Having gone through the record in the CON docket, do you see any official response to the inquiry?
I do not.
Given sort of your ample experience with CON matters, would you agree that it's atypical for the agency not to respond to an inquiry of this type?
I haven't really directly been involved in past inquiries, so I don't really know the answer to that.
Okay. And so based upon that, you wouldn't be in a position to say how many times in your years at OHS you've seen an inquiry left open for this long or indefinitely, correct?
Right, correct.
Okay. In your testimony, and bear with me while I find the page, I'm looking for the board minutes of the Hartford Healthcare meeting, which, let me just find where they are. I'm sorry, I should have marked them. I think they are Exhibit E. Which is Bates page 118.
Yes.
So you've testified about, in your written testimony, you've testified about this meeting. You've attached a copy of the minutes to your testimony, correct?
Yes.
Anywhere in these minutes, does it say that the closure of Windham OB services would be effective immediately?
No.
In fact, the minutes reference a timeline and approval process, do they not?
Yes.
And based on your experience with CONs, and this is going back a little bit, testing your memory, like historically, wasn't it pretty typical for OHS or probably more OCA to ask for board minutes and resolutions in CON applications? I mean, if I'm recalling, I think at one point it was a standard question to gather these minutes or these resolutions as part of the CON process.
They were at one time, yes.
Okay.
But as you know, our CON application gets updated frequently.
Okay. Can you think of an instance in which board minutes or resolutions were requested and those were used as evidence to prove that an applicant had proceeded with a project without CON approval versus having had the board just approve the project before the CON application was filed, before the regulatory process started?
I don't remember.
Okay. Going back to 2015, and I don't know if you remember what position you were in 2015, but you were a healthcare analyst at that time, right? In some
Right.
capacity? Okay.
Yes.
Given that you were a healthcare analyst at that time, you likely would have been aware of and might even have worked on the CON application to terminate Milford Hospital's obstetric program.
I remember the general project. I don't remember.
I'm going to have to object to this line of questioning about anything that happened in 2015. That's beyond the scope of my direct examination. It wasn't part of my direct examination, and wasn't part of the pre-file with respect to Steve.
Okay, well, these things have been administratively noticed and are in the record, and I would ask to be given some latitude, the same as Attorney Manzione was given latitude to ask about parts of the CON application that were not pre-filed. I can assure you it's a very brief line of questioning.
I will permit it and give it its due weight in connection with preparing my order.
So my question for you, Steve, is were you aware that Milford Hospital suspended its OB services due to staffing issues in advance of filing for and receiving CON approval?
I don't remember the specifics. I just remember the general project.
To the best of your knowledge, did OCA at the time assess a civil penalty against Milford for preemptively discontinuing OB services?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. And are you aware that a similar situation occurred in 2015 with the Sharon Hospital Sleep Center, where they, due to staffing issues, had to preemptively discontinue services before getting a CON?
Don't recall that.
Okay. And then I assume you don't recall whether they were fined or not. Do you recall?
I don't. My memory's getting really slow. With age.
Totally
So,
understand.
It's not on
Kids.
purpose, I tell you that.
Okay. So I guess a more general question is, in your 26 plus years at OCA and OHS, are you aware of any instances in which the agency has assessed a civil penalty against a provider, a hospital, for suspending a service due to staffing issues in the interest of patient safety before filing for a CON and then not ultimately waiving that penalty? Are you aware of any penalties that have been fully imposed in those situations?
Personally, no, because I wasn't involved in any of the inquiries or investigations, so I wouldn't have any knowledge of those at the time, from that time.
You may not know this then, given what you're working on now, but are you aware whether OHS is investigating or has penalized any other hospitals that have currently suspended OB services because they're not delivering babies? Or is Windham the only one?
I don't know. Positively, no.
Just a couple more questions. Would you agree, sort of CON process question, that the publication of notice of intent to file a CON application under section 19A 639A is a prerequisite to filing a CON application?
Yes,
And would you agree then that notice of that publication of that notice is the first step in the CON process, that it begins the CON process?
I suppose, yes.
Okay. That's it. I have no additional questions. Thanks, Steve.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Ms. Manzione, do you have any redirect for Mr. Lazarus?
I do, and I'm going to call him Steve. So Steve, I'm just going to ask you one
Sure.
quick question. Just to briefly follow up on that last point that Attorney Fusco made. How do we know at OHS, or how does OHS track when a CON application is filed?
The first time we know is when an application is uploaded to the portal.
And does a newspaper filing happen before or after that?
It's required to be done prior to that publication.
Is it possible that a organization or a hospital or a facility could make an advertisement in a newspaper and then not go forward with filing an application?
Yes.
So do you want to reconsider your statement you just made that filing the, publishing the notice in the newspaper is the first step in filing the application process?
Well, our application process starts when the application is uploaded to the portal. There have been several times when an applicant has put something in the newspaper that they intend to file an application, but it doesn't really begin the CON, but doesn't come in, or they miss the deadline, they don't follow up. So for OHS, officially, the application begins when it's filed their office. So that, for us, that's step one.
And is there a fee to file a CON application, a full CON application?
Yes, as if up until a couple of weeks ago, it was $500 flat fee.
And at what point does that fee have to be paid?
At the time of the filing, when it's filed with the portal.
So at the time when the application is filed into the portal is
Yes.
the time when the money has to come through.
Yes, we can't accept a application that doesn't have the payment with it or doesn't have evidence of the newspaper notice.
Okay. That was it. Thank you.
If I may just ask one
Yeah,
question based on that.
I was going to say that there were some things that came up that weren't addressed earlier. So if you want to do recross, that's fine.
So Steve, fully understanding that there are instances where, you know, a notice is published in the newspaper and folks don't go forward with a project. If you intend to go forward with a CON application, as Windham did here, you must publish notice in the newspaper at least 20 days in advance, correct? And no more than 90
Right.
days in advance? Okay,
Yes.
that's my only question. Thank
Okay.
you.
Steve, I did have a couple questions for you that are based on Attorney Fusco's examination of you.
Mhm.
Are inquiries typically part of the same docket, a CON application docket?
Typically, they're not.
Okay.
No.
And to your knowledge, is there a requirement that those inquiries be closed?
No.
Do you know, in your experience, whether inquiries have ever been formally closed?
No.
Okay, that's all I had. So we've been going for about an hour and a half. Some of us have been here for about 2 hours now. I'm going to suggest that we take maybe a 10-minute break and come back at 11:40 before we start with the respondents' evidence. Does that sound reasonable to everybody?
Yes, thanks.
Sounds very good.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Actually, it's 11:32 now, so let's say 11:42.
Great, thank you.
Very good. Okay.
Thanks. Thank you, Leslie. Attorney Fusco, do you have an opening statement that you'd like to make on behalf of your client?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, I do. Thank you. Good morning. I guess it's still morning, Attorney Shuka, Attorney Manzione, and Mr. Lazarus. As I mentioned previously, my name is Jennifer Fusco, and I represent Windham Hospital, the respondent in this matter. Thank you for the opportunity to provide an opening remark on behalf of my client, which is really intended to outline the issues before OHS in this civil penalty proceeding. To begin with, I'd like to thank the attorneys here specifically for working collaboratively with Windham throughout this process, which admittedly is new to all of us. neither OHS nor its predecessor agency has imposed a civil penalty and conducted a hearing of this type in nearly a decade. And there's a good reason for that. The imposition of a civil penalty is an extreme measure governed by a statute that imposes an exceedingly high standard on respondents. It's one of willfulness and not simple negligence or carelessness. And the statute also places the burden of proof on the agency as petitioner and not on the respondent to prove that that conduct took place and that it was in fact willful. As you know, Windham received a notice from OHS in February of 2022 that the agency was imposing a $65,000 civil penalty against the hospital for allegedly terminating inpatient OB services without first seeking CON approval. And in her opening, Attorney Manzanone seems to call this an inconsequential penalty, but it is consequential if it's not warranted and justified under the law. And really, any penalty is consequential when it takes monies away from healthcare providers that could otherwise direct it to patient care. But to the law, in order to impose a civil penalty under 653 of the Connecticut General Statutes, OHS has the burden of proving by a preponderance of the evidence, which means basically the better evidence, two things. First, that Windham Hospital engaged in an activity that required a CON under Section 19A 638 of the General Statutes. And second, that it willfully failed to seek CON approval for that activity. And we've now heard OHS's evidence in this matter, and based upon that evidence, this burden has not been met. And in fact, today you're going to hear better evidence from Donna Hanley, the president of Windham Hospital, who's with me, and Barbara Dirty, who's the director of strategic planning for Hartford Healthcare, showing that neither of the prerequisites to the imposition of a civil penalty under 653 have been met. The civil penalty that's being assessed must be rescinded if those elements are not clearly met. So looking a little more closely at the elements of 19A 653, as to OHS's allegation that Windham engaged in an activity requiring CON without first applying for a CON, what they're alleging here is that Windham terminated inpatient OB services in June of 2020, and that this required approval under 19A 638A5. The only problem being Windham did not terminate OB services in June of 2020. The services were suspended in June of 2020 with the full knowledge of the Office of Health Strategy and the Department of Public Health, the latter expressing concern over the competency of nurses who worked in the OB program under the circumstances that were present at that time. I can tell you that we understand that OB services cannot and will not be terminated unless and until OHS approves the CON application filed by Windham, which has now been pending before this agency for more than 20 months. You're going to hear today from Ms. Hanley and Ms. Dirty, who are going to explain to you the situation with Windham OB and how it evolved between September of 2019 and June of 2020, ultimately necessitating a suspension of the service in the interest of patient safety due to inadequate clinical coverage. You're also going to hear evidence of Windham Hospital's discussions with OHS about these very staffing challenges and the impending need to request CON approval to close the unit. As you'll see in our testimony, these discussions date back to November of 2019 and continued through the filing of the CON application in September of 2020. So OHS knew what was happening with Windham OB, and they encouraged the hospital to keep the program operational as long as possible, which it did. OHS also asked the hospital to engage key community stakeholders, which I know Mr. Lazarus mentioned is often important, and to hold a community forum during the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic, which the hospital also did. And now OHS is attempting to penalize Windham for soliciting advice from the agency and following that very advice. Much has been made, and it was discussed in Mr. Lazarus's testimony about the minutes of the HHC board meeting that took place in June of 2020 about the proposed closure of the OB service. Respectfully, these minutes do not prove what OHS believes they prove. The board's approval of the proposal to close Windham OB service does not mean the service was terminated in June of 2020. It means the board gave Windham permission to file the CON application and to begin the regulatory process to close the unit permanently. I think you heard Mr. Lazarus testify that it's not unusual, or at least at one point in time, it wasn't unusual for the agency to request board resolutions or minutes in connection with CON applications. And never before have these documents been used to prove or even suggest that an activity was undertaken in advance of OHS approval. In addition, and perhaps most importantly, there is clear precedent for a hospital's ability to suspend a service due to staffing issues without CON approval. This happened with the OB program at Milford Hospital just 5 years before Windham was forced to suspend its labor and delivery services for the same reason. If you look at the Milford Hospital docket, which was administratively noticed in this matter, it lays out a case very similar to the one presented by Windham. You've got the loss of coverage physicians and an inability to adequately staff the program. You've got a board of directors vote to close the program, followed by notification of key stakeholders and the publication of a CON notice. And you've got the suspension of the OB service while the application to terminate those services was pending. And in that case, OHS expeditiously reviewed the CON. They got it done in, I think, less than 5 months. They approved the closure and no one received a civil penalty. In fact, you heard Mr. Lazarus testify, and I could say in my nearly 25 years of handling CON matters, I'm not aware of any hospital being penalized for suspending a service in the interest of patient safety due to lack of clinical staffing. Importantly, because 19A653 is about intent and state of mind, Windham believed and Windham relied on this precedent, specifically the Milford precedent, the Sharon Sleep Center precedent, in making a good faith determination that suspension of OB services due to staffing issues pending CON approval to close the unit didn't require a CON. So that decision to suspend in June of 2020 and to immediately move forward with the CON application, just like Milford had done, didn't require CON approval. And OHS can't now suggest that the rules are different, and that suspension of this type constitutes a termination, because one of the fundamental premises of OHS and CON is the ability to rely on precedent, and this precedent is clearly on point. So moving on to the second prong of 19A653, that requires OHS to prove that Windham acted willfully in failing to file to request CON approval for the termination in June of 2020. And as I know you know, willful is a really high standard. It's one of knowledge and intentional disregard. It means to be reckless, to be wanton, malicious, to do something without just cause or with an intent to deceive. And that standard is so high that the agency has been forced to rescind most, if not all, of the civil penalties it's imposed over the years. And in fact, the agency has tried on multiple occasions to get that standard changed to one of negligence, and the legislature has refused to do so. So the evidence you're going to hear today, to the point of willfully failing to file, is that the hospital moved as expeditiously as possible after suspending those services to commence the CON process. The notice of CON, which we had to publish in order to be able to file an application, was published just 7 days after the service was suspended, and once all of the key stakeholders were notified at OHS's request. The application itself wasn't filed until September of 2020. But that's because the hospital was required to hold a virtual community forum in the middle of a global pandemic, which was really difficult to coordinate. And again, that was done at OHS's request. So I don't believe the evidence is not going to show that OHS can prove that there was any intent on the part of Windham to circumvent the CON process. And without that intent, there can't be a willful failure. And without a willful failure, there can't be a civil penalty under 19A653. You're going to hear primarily from Ms. Hanley today, who's going to let you know that Windham did everything in its power to hold together kind of a fragile labor and delivery service until it could no longer safely do so. The hospital kept OHS apprised throughout the process and consulted with DPH as part of its decision to suspend the service in June of 2020. Windham moved forward with the CON process immediately following the suspension and has worked diligently to bring the matter to a conclusion. And I think it's important to note that because we were in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic and with what was allowed at that time, Windham could simply have filed a notice with OHS and said, we're suspending OB services because we need the staff and we need the space to care for and manage COVID patients. And then we wouldn't be here, but they didn't, because they knew that they needed to permanently close that unit, and they knew they needed to file a CON application, and they wanted to be transparent. And transparency, in my mind, is the exact opposite of willful failure to file a CON application. Attorney Manzione also made a remark in her opening about sort of the consequences to the community of the suspension of OB services back in June of 2020. But I think you need to remember that the CON application has now been pending for 629 days without a decision. That's more than 20 months. And the agency itself has a statutory obligation to issue a decision, and it has not issued that decision, and the deadline passed. And to the extent that there are any consequences, they're being exacerbated by the agency's inaction as well. But instead of moving forward that decision, OHS is focused on trying to fine Windham for sort of this brief and justifiable delay in filing a CON for a service that it had to suspend out of necessity because it could simply no longer be operated in a safe manner. In order for OHS to impose the civil penalty, the hearing officer has to find that Windham knew it needed a CON in June of 2020 to suspend those services, and then it made a conscious decision not to request one. And I say the agency has not and cannot meet its burden of proof on either point. And because the elements of 1986-53 haven't been met, the civil penalty needs to be rescinded in its entirety. But let me turn this over. My plan is to have Ms. Handley give some narrative testimony, and then I have some questions for her, and then I'll also have some questions for Ms. Dirty. So I don't know if you want to swear them individually or at the same time.
We could just do them at the same time. That's
Okay.
fine. So first, I'll just have the witnesses identify themselves. So starting with Ms. Handley.
Yes, my name is Donna Handley, DONNAHANDLEY.
And your title, please.
Yes, I'm the president of Windham Hospital and the senior vice president for Hartford Healthcare.
Okay. Now, Ms. Dirty.
My name is Barbara Durdy, BARBARADURDY. I am the Director of Strategic Planning for Hartford Healthcare.
Thank you. Can we please zoom out so that I can see them both for the swearing in? Okay. Can you both please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or solemnly and sincerely affirm, as the case may be, that the evidence you shall give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, or upon penalty of perjury?
I do.
I do.
Thank you. So Attorney Fusco, you can proceed with Ms. Handley.
Absolutely. And Donna, you can.
Well, it's still morning. Good morning, attorneys Shuka and Manzione and members of the Office of Health Strategy. Again, my name is Donna Handley, president of Windham Hospital and vice president of Hartford Healthcare. Hartford Healthcare is an integrated healthcare delivery system whose East Region acute care general hospitals include Windham Hospital, which is the subject of this public hearing. I thank you for this opportunity to testify in opposition of the $65,000 civil penalty that OHS has imposed on Windham for its alleged termination of obstetric labor and delivery services at the hospital prior to filing a certificate of need application. I have submitted comprehensive written testimony in this matter, so I will keep my remarks brief today and really focus on the following points. First, Windham Hospital has not terminated OB services. Rather, these services were suspended at the end of June 2020, beginning July 1st, with the knowledge of the Department of Public Health and OHS due to the increasingly serious staffing challenges that could have had a significant impact on patient safety and quality outcomes. Second, Windham did not willfully fail to seek a certificate of need approval for the termination of OB services at the hospital as is required for the imposition of a civil penalty. Imposing a civil penalty against a hospital for suspending a program for quality-related issues and reasons is against public policy. So please let me begin by taking you through the circumstances that led to the decision to suspend OB services in Windham at the end of June 2020, pending CON approval to close the unit. As we discussed at length during the Windham OBCON hearing, birth volume at Windham has declined precipitously in recent years, with a 75% decrease in births between 2011 and 2019. In 2019, the hospital delivered less than 100 babies. In fact, it was 91 babies in 2019. By the fall of 2019, we found ourselves with only one employed obstetrician, full-time obstetrician, and we had on-call service from the Bacchus OBGYNs, and that arrangement was tenuous. On September 16th of 2019, we were notified that OBGYN Services, which is a private obstetric practice out of Norwich, and the hospital's exclusive call coverage provider, was terminating its coverage agreement with Windham effective December 31st, 2019. Around the same time, Connecticut Children's Specialty Services, who we contracted for neonatology services to provide neonatal care in our labor and delivery department, was having difficulty providing nursery coverage. In fact, they were hiring locums to provide that coverage at Windham. As the situation was developing and evolving in the fall of 2019, Barbara Dirty, Director of Strategic Planning, was in contact with OH staff regarding the fragility of the Windham OB service and the impending need to file a CON to permanently close the unit. Windham Hospital made every effort to keep the OB service operational during the first half of 2020, including through those very overwhelming and tumultuous first 4 months of the COVID-19 pandemic. This included contracting with individual physicians from OBGYN services beginning in January of 2020 for obstetric call coverage. But the available coverage was neither consistent nor sufficient to support the OB unit long-term. The precipitating event was at December 31st of 2019, the senior partner was ceasing the delivering of babies. So they would decrease to 5 physicians who could provide that coverage for both Bacchus and Windham hospitals. So for these reasons, during the early months of 2020, Windham was forced to place the obstetric department on diversion 3 times for a total of 30 days. Dr. Rosenstein, who was our full-time obstetrician, had scheduled 3 periods of PTO time. During that time, the physicians from Norwich and OBGYN services who were covering had very busy full practices, patients, that they were seeing and providing call coverage at Bacchus Hospital. So the decision was made to go on a week diversion in order for patients to have the appropriate coverage by the obstetricians. We had been planning for this eventuality for many months. So on June 15th, 2020, we presented the need for an indefinite suspension of OB services and a plan for patient care to the hospital's OB steering committee, where it was approved. On June 16th, the Hartford Healthcare Board of Directors meeting was held. And at that meeting, the rationale and plan for the closure of OB services at Windham was presented to the board. In fact, when we received the letter of termination of the agreement for call coverage back in September of 19, we were required by our governance board structure to notify the board of the potential risk and the commitment to the plan as we would follow through. So we kept the Hartford Healthcare Board apprised throughout the period of time from September 19th until the board meeting of June 16th. After the presentation, the board approved the plan to close Windham Obstetric Unit, subject to all necessary regulatory approvals, including CON authorization. That board approval was required before we could file a CON application for the termination of OB services. The first call I made on June 19th, I apologize, June 19th, was I called Donna Ortelli, DPH Facility Licensing and Investigation Section Chief, about Windham's inability to staff the OB service adequately and safely. I informed her of our plan to suspend the program indefinitely and submit a CON application for permanent closure of the unit. Ms. Ortelli expressed concerns about the ability of OB nurses to maintain competencies given the low volume of births at Windham Hospital. At the end of June 2020, following my conversation with Ms. Ortelli, an indefinite, the long-term suspension of labor and delivery services at Windham was implemented. Windham has not terminated the OB service. The hospital continues to maintain contracts with physicians for delivery support services. We have budget lines for this program. The space occupied by the OB unit has not been repurposed. Prior to July 8th, 2020, Harvard Healthcare implemented a communications plan to notify all relevant stakeholders of the indefinite suspension of OB service and the hospital's intent to file the CON application for permanent closure. These communications were necessary and consistent with advice given by OH staff to have an open dialogue with the community prior to filing our CON application. I personally spoke to 42 community leaders and elected officials, taking very detailed notes about their concerns and feedback in order to prepare for our community hearing. Between July 8th and July 10th of 2020, public notice of the CON application was published in the Chronicle, as has already been presented, thus beginning the CON process immediately after all necessary stakeholder communications took place. We felt it was imperative that the community understand the circumstances, the low volume, and the staff vacancies that were requiring this, rather than have them reading about this in the newspaper when they saw the public hearing notification. So to increase community understanding and support for this proposal, OHS advised us to hold the public forum. Coordinating that forum in the middle of COVID-19 was very challenging. The virtual community forum was planned and eventually held on August 10th of 2020. Between August 10th and September 3rd, we worked to address the community's concerns that were raised at that public forum so that it was embedded into our CON filing. And as already noted, on September 3rd, 2020, our final CON application was submitted. Again, not to be redundant, but the CON application for Windham OB has been pending for over 600 days without decision. I will defer to counsel on the legal arguments, but it is my understanding that OHS can only impose that civil penalty if the agency proves that the termination of services did in fact occur in June of 2020, and that Windham willfully failed to file a CON when one was required. And I don't believe that either of those can be proven here. As I discussed previously, Windham had a fragile OB service that we were increasingly challenged to staff in a way that ensured patient safety. I am a nurse, and quality and safety is my highest priority. A perfect storm of staffing issues culminated in June of 2020, leading us to determine that it was no longer safe to provide OB services at Windham going forward. This included the loss of our remaining called coverage obstetricians, And they began coverage when the private practice at Windham Hospital in 2015 moved to Manchester Hospital and moved their practice to Manchester. The loss of multiple nurses, including the unit coordinator, we had 10 open shifts of nursing coverage in the OB unit every single week. And we had inconsistent neonatal coverage. And the planned vacation, as I mentioned, of our sole staff obstetrician, Dr. Rosenstein. So we planned for this. We were thoughtful, we were deliberate, and based on some of the conversations and questions, we felt it imperative to have a very detailed plan in place for communication and education of our patients, how they would be cared for prenatally, during their delivery experience, and then during the postnatal period. So we implemented what was a long-term or indefinite suspension beginning at the end of June 2020. The suspension was consistent with my conversations with DPH, with Ms. Otelli, as I mentioned, her concern about the ability of Windham OB nurses to maintain their clinical competencies. We had periods of weeks at a time when a single baby was not delivered in the Windham OB unit. Evidence that we suspended the program in June of 2020 and did not terminate the program includes the fact that our contracts remain in place for the physicians for delivery services. We still budget for that program, and again, have not repurposed the space. We did not willfully fail to seek CON approval when a CON was required. We did not believe that a CON was required for us to suspend OB service in the interest of patient safety while obtaining the approval from OHS to permanently close the unit. In fact, past OHS precedent made it clear that we could do exactly this without triggering a CON or a civil penalty. Windham had a good faith basis to believe that a suspension pending CON approval determination was allowed, including the context of OB service terminations, given what had happened at other hospitals, including Milford. There was no intent to circumvent OHS CON requirements or to deceive OHS. In fact, Windham kept OHS apprised for nearly a year before the suspension occurred that the program was in a fragile state and that a CON filing would be necessary when staffing challenges became insurmountable. We also notified DPH before implementing the long-term suspension. Imposing a civil penalty for suspending a program for quality-related reasons is against public policy. By imposing a substantial civil penalty against Windham for suspending its OB service, when in the judgment of clinical professionals, it was unsafe to keep the program open, OHS is encouraging hospitals to continue to operate unsafe programs lest they be fined. We rely on agencies like DPH to assist us in evaluating the quality and safety of the services we provide. I consulted with Ms. Otelli at DPH about the program's low volume and staffing challenges and our need to suspend pending regulatory approval. Hospitals need the flexibility to make these kinds of decisions quickly in the interest of patient safety. To maintain an OB program where patient safety could no longer be ensured would be entirely inconsistent with the OHS's mission to promote equal access to high quality healthcare and ensure better health for the people of Connecticut. And let me conclude with a few things I think it's important for OHS to keep in mind in considering the waiver of the civil penalty against Windham Hospital. Windham has a history of compliance with CON statutes and regulations. The hospital has a history of applying for CON approval when it is required and of requesting clarification when we are unsure. We are forthcoming with information as evidenced by the fact that we spoke with DPH OHS, and community stakeholders about the suspension of OB services at Windham, pending CON approval to close the unit. Windham has proven itself to be a good community partner. We are committed to the healthcare needs of our community, and our efforts to expand services for women, including prenatal and postpartum care, is evident. OHS has the power to waive or rescind the civil penalty. Here, where a decision was made of necessity and in the interest of patient safety, and where women were safely transitioned to alternate providers of their choice, rescission waiver of the civil penalty is justified. Considering the foregoing, we respectfully request that OHS exercise its discretion to waive imposition of the $65,000 civil penalty against Windham. I thank you for your time and willingness to hear our evidence and arguments. I'm available to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Ms. Hanley. Attorney Fusco, it's my understanding you wanted to do some direct exam with her.
Yeah, I just have some brief direct exam for Ms. Hanley and Ms. Derby.
Can we back the camera out a little bit so that I can see both of you?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Hanley, what day was the last delivery at Windham Hospital?
So the last delivery at Windham Hospital was on June 16th of 2020.
Okay. And other than during Dr. Rosenstein's vacation from June 20th to 27th, when we're talking about that month of June 2020, did you have coverage through the end of the month?
Yes, we had full services available through June 30th of 2020.
Okay. Did any women present in labor to deliver babies during that time?
No, if the woman had presented, we would have delivered her child.
Okay. So the date you suspended OB services was actually then effective, what date?
Technically, it was July 1 of 2020. We had services in place until midnight at the end of June 30.
Okay. When you suspended OB services effective July 1, 2020, did you believe you were terminating a hospital service at that time?
Absolutely not.
What did you believe you were doing?
We believe that we were suspending the service pending approval, filing of our CON, and eventual decision by OHS.
To the best of your knowledge, is a termination of services defined in the OHS statutes?
To the best of my knowledge, it is not.
Is a suspension of services defined in the OHS statutes?
To the best of my knowledge, it is not.
Did you believe that the suspension of services you were implementing in June of 2020 required CON approval?
No, we did not believe that suspending the service in the interest of patient safety required CON approval.
And were you advised by legal counsel on this?
Yes, we discussed this with our attorney, who advised us that a suspension pending CON approval to close the OB unit did not require CON approval.
And are you aware of the precedents that I referenced, the OHS precedent that I referenced in my opening remark about other hospitals that suspended OB services?
Yes, we were aware that Milford Hospital had suspended their OB services due to staffing challenges similar to those that we were facing at Windham Hospital in June of 2020. They suspended the program, filed for CON, and after the suspension took place, received approval and were not fined.
Did you rely on that Milford Hospital and other precedent and the advice of legal counsel in deciding to suspend the service in June of 2020 and seek CON approval after the suspension took effect?
Yes, we did. And based on this precedent and the advice of counsel, we made a good faith determination that no CON was required at that time.
If you believed a CON was required to suspend the service in June of 2020, would you have requested one?
Yes.
Did you always intend to file a CON application and obtain OHS approval before permanently terminating the services?
Yes, which is why we filed public notice on July 8th, 9th, and 10th.
And as the president of Windham Hospital, who ultimately implemented this process of suspension, like, did you ever intend to usurp the CON process by suspending OB services before the CON was filed?
Absolutely not.
Are you aware, just moving on to a different line of questioning, are you aware that Windham was eligible to suspend OB services in June of 2020 pursuant to Governor Lamont's Executive Order 7B and the OHS guidance during COVID?
Yes, as president of an acute care general hospital, I was aware of our ability to suspend services to assist in caring for and managing COVID-19 patients.
And why didn't you do this?
Because we knew that we had to close our OB program pending final approval of OHS. We had low volume, our volume was decreasing. We lost our coverage. We had critical physician and nurse staffing issues. So we did not have the resources that we needed to keep the program up.
That's all the questions I have for Ms. Hanley. May I direct some questions to Ms. Sturdy now?
Yeah, that's fine. Actually, yeah, I think it makes maybe more sense to do cross-exam.
One at a time? Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was trying to object. I was on mute. Sorry, I was like, I'm trying to signal. I think I heard my
I
cat
agree.
song.
That's fine.
So I was going to ask permission to do cross individually before I
Sure.
lose the train
That's
of
fine.
thought.
okay. That's
Okay,
fine.
great. Okay, thank you, everyone. Okay. Okay. I'll just get myself together here. All right. Ms. Hanley, will you remind me, please, what is your current position at Windham Hospital?
I'm the president of Windham Hospital.
And how long have you held that position?
I became the president of Windham Hospital on October 1 of 2017, so a little over 4.5 years.
Okay, great. And could you tell me what the mission statement of Windham Hospital is?
I should know this.
You can, if you have to refer to something to refresh your recollection, you know, I sort of know OHS's mission statement.
I am going to object for the same reason you objected before. I mean, that's not something that's in her direct testimony. If you want her to look it up and read it, that's fine.
I'm happy to do that. I wasn't prepared for such a routine question. My apologies.
You know, you have to prepare the interview question. Why should you hire me?
Yes, exactly.
Jenna has it.
Jenna
Yeah,
has
but-
it. Thank you, Jenna.
Same mission. Okay, this is like what my mantra, right? To improve the health and healing of the people in the communities we serve.
I'm sorry, so to improve the health and,
Healing of the people and communities we serve.
great, thank you. I asked you that question because I heard you talk about your background as a nurse, and I figured you, yes, you definitely, I'm sure you believe that mission statement and you're a mission-driven person.
Thank you.
And I believe when you say you take very seriously the quality-related issues and how important that is. My question is, So my first question is, you were testifying just now about being advised by legal counsel that you should suspend your service in June of 2020. And you were relying on Milford case precedent that everything would be okay if you were just to go ahead and suspend service without filing a CON. Not that you needed to, because it was just a suspension in your words. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, and have you ever heard of a process at the OHS, the Office of Health Strategy has, called a determination process?
I've heard of that, yes.
Okay, would you know that a determination is sort of like a question that is filed when an entity like a facility, a hospital, isn't sure whether a CON is needed? It was something that a facility would file with OHS to determine whether a CON is needed. Does that sound like something that you knew?
So for me, there was no question that a CON needed to be filed for a final determination. And we were working through that process. It was a period of time, and over 2 years later, the pandemic, we've learned to live with this. We have science, we have evidence, we have policies, we have processes to keep patients and staff safe. In March of 2020, when the pandemic was coming to Eastern Connecticut, we were really focused on preparing our communities, preparing our hospitals to manage through that pandemic. We never lost sight of the fact that this was a process that we would absolutely initiate. Starting in 2019, when, and there's a long process, I'll address your questions. There's so much history that led to the filing of the CON. So we did not file a determination of need because we knew we would be filing eventually the CON application. I have a whole brain
Okay.
dump for you, Attorney Mangione.
No,
I don't want to cloud the procedure.
Yeah, no, and I didn't want to interrupt you because I thought you had other interesting things to say. So you knew about the determination option and
Yes.
you chose not to file it because you thought it was inappropriate. Is that accurate?
I did not think it was indicated in this situation. That's correct.
Okay. And similarly, you knew about the Executive Order 7B of the governor, which allowed healthcare hospitals to not have to go through a CON process to suspend services in order to address patient safety, patient care because of the pandemic. Is that true?
That's true. Yes.
Okay. I know that you talked a lot about difficulty with staffing, difficulty with keeping the shifts staffed fully. You used a word, and you used a word in your written testimony that I'm not familiar with, a Latin word. I think it means something like per diems for doctors. It's locums.
Locums, yes.
Can you
Locum
tell me
tenens.
what that word is and what exactly does it mean?
So locum tenens are, in the case physicians, there are agencies that supply physicians for short-term coverage. And so that's what that means. You heard the term, more current term is relates to our staffing shortages of travelers. They're traveler physicians, but they're called locum tenens.
Okay, so a locum tenens would be physicians who are play a similar role to like a temp, but
Correct.
for physicians.
Yes.
Like similarly to temporary nurses, we've heard a lot about during the pandemic are called travelers.
Yes.
Did Windham Hospital hire travelers, the nurses, during any of the time, let's just say the first 6 months of 2020 in its OB unit to help staff?
So there's a long history in Windham OB of locum tenens physicians and travel nurses. And we had, we're unable to, we had positions posted for, we had one position RN posted for 2 years, no applicants. We had a travel nurse come, and after 2 weeks of not a single delivery, she resigned and called her agency because she came to deliver babies and there were no babies to deliver. So she left.
So let me just redirect you just a little bit here. So is your testimony that Windham Hospital in the months of January to June of 2020 hired travel nurses in the OB department?
We did not.
So the one traveler that you did hire who
That was
resigned, that was
even before the pandemic.
a different time period.
It's a different time period.
So did Windham Hospital affirmatively decide not to try to hire travel nurses during that January to June 2020 time period?
We did not. The nurses who were staffing the OB unit picked up and covered those shifts. So there was never, we did not, they covered every shift. So we had the coverage we needed, but it was with the very limited. We had, 8.4 FTEs covering the obstetrics unit, 2 nurses per shift. So nurses signed
Okay,
up
let
to
me
cover.
excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but so you didn't feel the need to hire traveling nurses in OB during that time period?
Correct.
You, okay. Did you feel the need to hire traveling doctors or locum tenens in the OB department in January to June of 2020?
I did not. When OBGYN services terminated, we had an agreement with the group. And when the senior physician, as I mentioned, discontinued delivering babies, that's why the termination of the agreement notice was given. I was able to work with individual physicians within the group to cover us beginning January 1. So we provided on-call coverage during that
Okay.
period of time.
So now let's switch to the period after the first 2 quarters of the year. Let's talk about the period starting the 3rd quarter, July 1, and the 3rd quarter of the year. Did you have the need, or did you actually, Windham Hospital, hire traveling nurses for the OB department at Windham Hospital?
No, we did not.
How about locums tenens, the physicians that travel?
No, we did not.
Okay, and why did you not hire doctors, traveling doctors or traveling nurses?
Well, we had made the decision to, based on low volume, the fact that it was in the best interest in the quality and safety of our patients to have a different plan to coordinate care for their delivery.
So if you had made the plan to continue to offer OB services at Windham Hospital, would it have been an option to hire, for example, traveling nurses or locum tenens
So,
during the third quarter of 2020?
so one of the most fundamental tenets of healthcare is teams. So traveler nurses and locum physicians they come for various periods of time. But delivering a baby is very much requires a team who can work well together. So having, kind of transitional and transitory physicians and nurses creates a higher risk.
Okay, so let me just ask you to give me a yes or no,
Okay,
please. That would be easier. So did Windham Hospital hire any traveling nurses or locums doctors during the third quarter to staff the OB department?
I will reiterate my answer to that question. It is no.
No. Was Windham Hospital in a financial position to do so?
It was never a question of finances. It was about quality and safety.
So the answer is, so if I asked you, did Windham Hospital have sufficient resources monetarily to hire those traveling types of professionals? The answer would be yes.
Yes.
Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I hear that traveling physicians, and I don't know about physicians, but I hear traveling nurses are very expensive.
They are.
Is that your
and-
experience?
Yes, they're very expensive. At this moment in time, if you turn back the clock to June and July of 2020, I think.
You know what? I'm sorry. I'm going to have to interrupt you because I need to keep asking a couple more questions, and I don't want this to go on for a long time today. I want to return to your conversations that you had. You said you had 32 conversations with community leaders. Is that close to what you
More.
said?
No, I said 42, but that's.
Oh, 42. I got the number wrong.
Right.
Sorry.
Yes.
Thank you. So what were some of the main themes that you learned from these conversations?
Well, concern about what would happen to the staff. Every staff member, nobody lost their job. Consistently, and this was immediately before, everybody was sad. Out of the 42 people that we talked to, elected official, community leaders, supporters, corporators of the hospital, they wanted to ensure that we had a good plan for our patients. They wanted to be sure that we had a transportation plan. They wanted to be sure that we were communicating in each patient's primary first language. And just go with that. I kept my notes. I'm looking at them as we speak.
And I mean, I'm yeah, sorry. I'm actually just going to interject and object to this line of questioning. I mean, the issues here are limited to whether services were terminated in June of 2020 and whether that was done willfully. So I don't believe that the community's response and requests and reaction is relevant to the 19A653 analysis.
Okay, well, your client brought up about all of these conversations she had with the community and how important they were to her decision making. And I wanted to explore a little bit about why they were important.
They were not raised in terms of their importance to the decision-making. They were raised to establish for OHS why there was a delay between when the program was suspended and when the public notice of CON was filed. There was a need in that 7 to 10 day period to have 42 conversations. What the substance of those conversations with is irrelevant. It was introduced for purposes of showing that there would have been a 7 to 10 day delay there. And I think that was clear in the testimony.
So a cynical person would interpret that approach as saying the conversations were held as a means to check a box. OHS said, you have to have conversations. So we check the box and we have conversations. I do not think that the president of the hospital would spend time talking to members of the community just in order to satisfy checking a box on an application. I think this is a mission-driven person, and I'm curious to see how the conversations affected her input, her viewpoint, and her decision-making.
But there were no.
That's why I was curious
I'm
for
sorry.
themes. I wasn't asking
but
individual.
understand, but respectfully, there was no decision-making after that time. The services was already suspended. We were planning to file a CON. We had the public notice ready to go. And all we've offered this evidence before is to show why there was a delay between the suspension and the publication of the public notice. She'll tell you that they were meaningful conversations. Those conversations were discussed in the CON docket. Attorney Chuka is probably familiar with that testimony, but it's not relevant to what is at issue here, which is a very, very specific legal issue, which is, did they willfully fail to file the CON? And we've offered evidence of delays in filing and an explanation for that delay. I wouldn't, no, please don't answer.
So,
Yeah, Ms. Manzione, do you have anything further? If not, I'll
Yes.
rule on the objection.
yes, I can move on.
Okay,
If you want to rule on the objection, that's fine, but I can move on.
I won't bother.
Okay. Okay, so Ms. Hanley, so what is the what was the purpose of reaching out to, I think you said DPH, a person who's in the licensing office at DPH, to a woman named Donna, maybe Ortelli?
Yes.
What was the purpose of that phone call or email or however you reached out to her?
So it is, I have an important responsibility to provide the quality and safety care as expected by DPH, and they're the regulatory agency with which we follow those standards. And given that I would be suspending the program, the service, until we could get through this process, I felt it imperative that I have a conversation with DPH, explain the current situation, why this process was beginning. And it's about respect for an agency that is really important to the quality of the care that we deliver in our hospitals.
So you reached out on, you say June 19th and
Yes.
called Ms. Ortelli.
Yes.
And in what was the gist of your conversation? What was the main point?
It was to inform her, again, out of respect, knowing that we would be communicating to the community, communicating to our staff, and then filing public notice. I wanted, as the president of the hospital, to show her the respect and have that conversation with her. Let her know that this is the plan for the Windham OB department.
Okay, and did you call anybody else with that same or a similar kind of message around that same time?
No, in our plan, and we had a very detailed plan. The plan was always that I would call the Department of Public Health and Barbara Dirty would call the Office of Health Strategy.
Okay,
We're dividing and
And-
conquering.
I understand. Okay, and did Ms. Mortelli respond to you in any way that you recall? Did she
Yes.
tell you to do anything?
She immediately raised the question about competency, which is a key tenet of our GPH standards. And really in a collegial manner, supported, I laid out the plan and she just reinforced and validated that we would not close anything until we had formal approval from OHS. We didn't go into any detail. I was well aware that we would not close the department until we had OHS approval.
Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying those things for me, and I am
You're welcome.
done with asking you questions, Ms. Handley.
Thank you, Attorney Manzioni.
Thank you.
Attorney Fusco, did you have any redirect for your witness?
Yes, just one question, going back to something Attorney Manzione had asked you, Ms. Hanley. If after July 1, 2020, you had to staff the OB program with exclusively locum tenens physicians and traveling nurses, which would likely have been the case, would that have presented patient safety issues, and what would those issues have been?
So not to go back historically, but when the private practice group left Windham Hospital in 2015, our experience with locum tenens as they came and went, we didn't know who was coming. They would sometimes leave without knowing they were leaving, and that left gaps in care. And at that point in time, traveler physicians and nurses were being used to care for the pandemic nationally. It was impossible to get travel nurses and physicians at that period of time.
Thank you. I have no more questions of Ms. Hanley.
Okay. So I guess we will do, Ms. Dirty, correct me if I'm wrong, she didn't file any pre-file testimony, is that correct?
No, that's correct. I just wanted to ask, I mean, the questions are sort of specific to some of the information that was in the rebuttal that wasn't assigned to any particular witness, but I think she can sort of put into evidence some of those points that were made.
Okay, that's fine. I did just remember before we move off of Ms. Hanley, I just realized that I didn't ask whether she adopted her pre-file testimony.
No, I adopt my pre-file testimony.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
know we're a ways off from doing that, but I appreciate that.
Okay, of course.
Thanks, Anna. Okay.
Can we have the camera pan over?
As soon as she speaks, I will go ahead.
Oh,
Say something, Bob.
there you go.
Okay, so do I need to introduce myself again? Barbara Dirty, Director of Strategic Planning, Hartford Healthcare.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Ms. Dirty. I just have a few questions for you. So in your role as Director of Strategic Planning of Hartford Healthcare, are you responsible for planning in HHG's East Region, including
Yes.
Windham?
Yes, I work across all regions, system-wide.
And what does your job entail specifically with regard to certificate of need?
Regarding certificate of need, my job entails reviewing business plans and projects for CON implications, coordinating and preparing all the submissions, including public notice, the applications, completeness responses, in general, coordinating the process.
When did you, I guess the question is, did you speak with OHS staff about the Windham OB service?
I did.
Okay, and when did you first speak with Windham OB about, the potential need to file a CON to close the unit?
My first conversation with OHS staff was November 1st, 2019.
And who did you speak with from OHS?
Kimberly Martone, who I believe at that time was Chief of Staff, Deputy Director of the agency.
And who else was on that call?
my colleague Jason Labs from East Region, our CON counsel, yourself, Jen Fusco, and Ms. Martone.
And what was discussed on the call?
Well, the purpose of the call really was to give Ms. Martone an update about the circumstances with the labor and delivery service at Windham Hospital, specifically that we were losing our physician on-call coverage effective December 31st, and that we were preparing to file a certificate of need application to formally terminate the service. And as Steve mentioned in his earlier testimony, we often would call OHS staff to get guidance on how to proceed, especially when we anticipate, a complicated or sensitive application.
And what, if any, recommendations did Ms. Martone have for Windham during that call?
Well, she strongly encouraged us to exhaust all resources at Windham Hospital and system-wide to keep the service operational for as long as we possibly could. She strongly urged us to make every effort to inform all stakeholders, internal community stakeholders, prior to filing the certificate of need. And that she also suggested, strongly encouraged us to hold a community forum so that we could incorporate the feedback we received from the community into the CON application.
Did you know, had OHS scheduled a forum around that time too?
They did, but they ended up canceling it because we were holding ours.
Did you, moving forward to sort of the late June, early July 2020 timeframe, did you have another call with someone at OHS once the decision to suspend OB services was made?
I did. I called Ms. Martone again to give her a heads up that public notice was going to run starting July 8th. And that was not that was not atypical. I mean, that was something I would typically do.
Did she have a sense of when you were going to file the CON application? Did you discuss with her sort of what needed to happen before you could do that?
Well, I told her that we would be filing it as soon as we could hold the community forum, and that probably would be coming within the next few weeks.
Okay. Did you ever have a conversation with Mr. Lazarus about Windham OB?
I did not.
I assume you are aware that Windham held a community forum on the OB service
Yes.
termination. When did that forum take place?
August 10th.
And were you privy to the invitation list for that forum?
I did see it. Actually, I did see it. And yes, I did.
Was anyone from OHS invited?
Leslie Greer was sent an invitation.
Now you are the one who's responsible for publishing notice of intent to file a CON application, correct?
Correct.
When was the notice published in this matter?
July 8th, 9th, and 10th.
Okay. And were you able to publish it earlier than that?
We were not, because following, the guidance we received from Ms. Martone, we wanted to make sure that we reached out to every stakeholder and so that Ms. Yanley had an opportunity to communicate directly with every stakeholder before they read about it in the newspaper.
And you were responsible for actually uploading the CON application
Yes.
as well, correct? And when was that filed?
September 3rd.
And could it have been filed any sooner?
No, we weren't able to hold the community forum until August 10th. And then it took, 2 or 3 weeks after to incorporate and address all the concerns that we heard from the community into the application, finalize the application, and then we submitted it as soon as we could.
Okay. Are you the designated contact for the Windham OB CON?
I am.
And do you know when the hearing record was closed?
Oh, boy, I want to say March 17th, March 17th, yeah.
And based upon that, when would you have expected to receive a decision?
60 days later, or, May 16th.
Okay. And have you received the decision?
No,
Or any contact from OHS?
no.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Okay. Ms. Mencion, do you have any cross for Ms. Dirty?
Yes, yes, just give me one moment, please, to pull it together. Okay. Hello, Ms. Dirty. I have seen your name on so many pieces of paper. I have been looking forward to the chance to meet you, and this will have to do. So
Well,
hello.
It's nice to meet you too virtually, but nice to meet you.
Yeah. Yes, I'm sure we will be working together. You are, you have your name on lots and lots of projects going forward. I would like to ask you about, I'm sorry,
Oh,
did
no,
I
I'm
say something
just-
wrong?
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, I guess.
Oh, no, I say that because I'm one of the people who keeps track of all the things, and
Understood.
it just seems like there are a lot of things to do, and several of them that are up soon seem to have your name or
Understood.
Hartford Healthcare or some. Anyway, we'll be in touch. I think Steve has already been in touch with you about a few things coming up next month. Anyway, we'll leave that as it is. I would like to ask you about the same kind of conversation I was trying to ask Ms. Hanley about June 2020 and about being advised by legal counsel to suspend service and rely on the Milford case precedent. Do you remember this conversation, this testimony just now?
I do, yes.
Okay. I would like to know, I was asking Ms. Henley if she was aware of the process of filing a determination at OHS, and if that was, if she had ever considered filing a determination. I am going to ask you that same question. I know you are aware of what the determination process is. So I'm going to ask you, did you consider advising the Windham Hospital or any representatives of Windham Hospital to submit a determination to determine whether a CON should be filed regarding the termination of OB services in late June, early July of 2020?
No, I did not. It was always clear to us that a CON would be required. So there was no ambiguity around
She's
whether or not.
asking about at this kind of a
Oh, at
suspension
that, oh,
in June of 2020.
no, I did not.
Okay, and why is it that you did not?
Because it was always clear to us that a CON would be required if we were going to terminate a hospital service.
Okay, and so in the Ms. Hanley also said that she was counseled or advised by legal counsel to rely on the case precedent in Milford. Are you familiar with that case, with what happened in that situation?
Generally, yes, I am.
Okay, and would you advise someone, a coworker, a colleague, to rely on prior case precedent at OH and in matters of OHS?
I'm just going to object. I mean, she's not an attorney, but if you're asking her as a layperson who's familiar with CON precedent, an answer.
I am asking Ms. Dirty as a person who has many years, I don't know how many, and I'm not going to put a number on it unless you are, but many years and lots of experience with going through the CON process with OHS and the predecessor organizations. So my question to you in that capacity is, would you advise, as a layperson, a colleague or a coworker to rely on precedent in taking action, making decisions regarding the CON activity?
Yes, if I felt the facts and the circumstances were very similar to another application, yes, I would. I would feel comfortable doing that.
Okay. Thank you for that. My other question is, so it concerns how long it's been taking the Office of Health Strategy to produce decisions and things like that. So you testified that the record was closed on March 17th. And so far there has been no decision rendered. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Yes.
And the statute says we should have produced a decision in 60 days. Is that correct?
Correct.
Are there, do you happen to know if there are other cases that are pending that have not met the statutory deadline in
Yes,
terms of having the decision produced?
Yes,
Excuse
there are
me?
yes, there are many.
Yes, yes, I hate to admit it, but yes, there are many. I'm just pointing this out that this is not the only one, unfortunately. And do you know, when I'm going to go back now to your conversation with Kim Martone, or one of your conversations back with Kim Martone, do you know when she gave you the recommendation to exhaust all of your resources and to keep your services open as long as possible, do you know why she made those recommendations?
I think she wanted us to be able to demonstrate that we had crossed every T and dotted every I and made every effort to keep the service open and operational before we made the decision to seek regulatory approval to terminate.
Okay. Had Windham Hospital or Hartford Healthcare as the parent organization of Windham Hospital received any indication from members of the community that they were upset with a plan of what was happening,
I wouldn't have,
terminating?
that's a question.
Yeah,
for
I mean,
Donna.
again, I'm going to object to this line of questioning. It's not relevant to the discrete issues in the civil penalty proceeding, which are, did we terminate the service and did we willfully fail to seek a CON?
Ms. Manzione, what was your question again? I'm sorry. I was turning.
I was asking Ms. Dirty if she was aware if Hartford Healthcare or Windham Hospital had received any indication from the community, from the public, about their viewpoint of the services for OB being terminated or suspended.
At the time of
I'm-
my,
And again, yeah, I mean,
I'm going to sustain the objection. I don't think that's relevant to this.
Okay. Okay, and have you okay, that's the end of my questions for Ms. Dirty. Thanks.
Okay. Attorney Fusco, did you have any follow-up?
I do, and it's not redirect, but it's just a point of clarification. Attorney Manzione mentioned several times in questioning both Ms. Hanley and Ms. Dirty that legal counsel, that being me, she asked them if I had advised Windham to suspend the service. And I just want to make sure this is clear. I did not advise them to suspend the service. That's a clinical decision. Okay, what we're talking about is whether I advised them on precedent that clearly stated you could suspend a service under these circumstances without filing for CON approval before that suspension. And that gets to the issue of why you wouldn't request a CON determination, because the law only requires you to request one when you're unsure whether a CON is required. So if your attorney tells you they've analyzed it and a CON isn't required, you wouldn't file. So I just wanted to make sure that point was clear on the record. Oh, I have no further questions for either witness.
I did want to ask Ms. Hanley a couple questions. And Attorney Fusco, you are free to follow up on anything or on any of her responses. So in her pre-file at page 8, let me see if I can pull that up. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes,
Okay. So 3 bullets down, you say the hospital continues to maintain contracts with physicians for delivery support services and budget for the program. The space occupied by the OB unit has not been repurposed. Do you see that?
yes, I do.
Did you offer testimony at the CON application hearing in the fall of 2021?
I did, yes.
And do you recall stating, or do you recall stating that, or do you recall any of the other witnesses bringing that to OHS's attention during that hearing?
I'm sorry, bringing what, I'm not sure that, I just for some clarity.
I can clarify. He's asking whether you testified to those points in the CON hearing. And I mean, I'll allow her to answer, but I'd like to clarify if I can.
That's fine. And I'll clarify too. My reason for asking that is I'm familiar with that. And I'm familiar with all of the filings in that case. And this is the first I've heard of the hospital continuing to maintain contracts with physicians for delivery support services.
If I can just interject before you answer, I mean, again, it gets back to the issues being different in the 2 dockets. No one was asking us to prove in the CON application that we had suspended, not terminated the service. We assumed at that point in time that it was understood based upon our conversations with OHS. So we had focused our CON filing on the CON decision criteria. When we've been given a notice of civil penalty and that question has been raised, we thought it was important to bring that information to light.
Okay. So that ties into my second question, which is, if the CON application is not approved, what is the hospital's plan going forward?
Well, given that the situation remains the same, we have very low volume. We do not have physicians and we do not have nurses. We would be in the very same situation that we were in the end of June of 2020. Right? We can't deliver babies without doctors and nurses. I've learned from Attorney Mangione to just answer the questions that's asked. So thank you for that. Thank you.
So I'll ask the question again. What is the plan if termination of services is not approved?
We don't have one.
Okay.
We don't have one.
And just to go back to the other thing that I was just asking you about in terms of the hospital continuing to maintain contracts. in September of 2020, the CON application was filed. Is that correct?
Correct.
And in February of 2022, the notice of civil penalty was issued. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you think it is relevant to this proceeding for OHS to have known that the hospital continued to maintain contracts with physicians for delivery support services and to budget for the program, and that it had not occupied the OB unit?
Are you asking, I'm sorry, can you clarify? Are you asking, is it relevant to this civil penalty proceeding?
So, do you think OHS would have issued a notice of civil penalty in February of 2022 if we had known that the hospital continued to maintain contracts with physicians for delivery support services and to budget for the program?
Like, I don't think Ms. Hanley knows whether you would have or not, but I mean, frankly, we're confounded as to why we're here right now. I mean, we were never asked that question. An inquiry was started. We responded to the inquiry. A year and a half went by. We weren't asked any more questions. It wasn't resolved. No one ever asked that of us, and it didn't occur to us to offer it because it wasn't relevant to the CON proceeding. But certainly had we been asked for that information, we would have been forthcoming and potentially we could avoid being here. But we don't know what was in OHS's mind. And to my questions to Mr. Lazarus, there have been a whole lot of hands dealing with this over the last 2 years.
Okay. That was my only other question.
Thank
So, Attorney Fusco, I said I would allow you to ask additional follow-up if you had any.
Yep, just briefly, Ms. Hanley. So you said if the CON decision, if the CON to terminate the service is denied, you don't currently have a plan for what you would do to restart the services. Presumably you would evaluate that at the time if you received a denial.
Absolutely.
But what you testified to before is that if it was denied and you were back in that position where you needed to evaluate it, you would find yourself in the exact same position you were in June of 2020, correct? Where the staffing challenges caused you to have to suspend.
That is correct.
That's it. No further questions.
Okay, thank you. It is now 1:11 p.m. We can either take lunch now, or we can just take a brief break and then come back for final argument, etc. So
Yeah,
I leave that to you.
I'm happy. Laura, I don't know what you have, but I have a very brief closing remark. So if it's easier to wrap it up, I'm happy.
I'm with you, Jen.
I'm
I
with
have
you.
2 to 3 minutes.
Exactly.
And then whatever housekeeping we have, I would be very happy to step away from this proceeding.
Okay.
Not from this group, but from this proceeding.
We
We
don't
could all
take
go
that
out for
personally.
lunch. I would be happy to do that.
Okay.
So do you, let's just take a 5-minute break to regroup, and then we can come back and we can wrap up.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Certainly.
So let's come back at 1:17 and
Okay,
I will see you then.
okay.
Restart recording. Thank you. So before we get to closing arguments, I just wanted to discuss the matter of legal briefs. I understand that the hospital wants an opportunity to file one. I'm going to assume that OHS may also want to file one as well.
Yes.
So given, as we discussed yesterday, given the fact that there will be some time, a delay between when this hearing concludes and when we receive the transcript, and the parties may wish to refer to the transcript in connection with filing their briefs. I'm going to suggest that we do a deadline of 20 days from the date on which the transcript is made available through the portal. And I'll issue, actually, it's not necessary that I issue an order. But does 20 days sound reasonable to you? I know this hearing went on considerably longer than I think any of us expected. So the transcript will be longer and perhaps review may be longer. But 20 days, 30 days, whatever the parties think is reasonable, I'm open to.
I'm
I
20
would
days.
appreciate, I would appreciate to have just a few more days, depending on, I don't know when that 20 to 30 days is going to fall. That might be right around the holidays. So it's
Okay.
just a little bit of breathing room would be better.
So let's say 30 days, and I can issue an order that clarifies the date,
Sure.
the deadline.
Thank you.
That works, thanks.
That would be great.
That way there are no questions. So are there any other topics that need to be addressed before we start closing arguments? Ms. Manzione?
Yes. Okay. Closing argument. I will be
Oh,
brief.
No, I was just asking if there were
Oh,
any
no.
other, okay.
He's not yelling at you to start.
Nope. I'm ready. I'm ready. I have no more issues.
Okay.
No more, nothing needs to be addressed, but if anyone else does.
Attorney Fusco?
No, I'm sorry, I'm all set, thanks.
Okay. So with that, Attorney Manzione, you can proceed.
Okay. Okay. As I said during my opening statement this morning, I had one task. I had to prove that Windham Hospital knowingly and willfully terminated its inpatient obstetric services without first obtaining a certificate of need. And I did just that. I provided evidence that Windham Hospital terminated its obstetric services as of July 1st, 2020, and didn't file a certificate of need until September 3rd, 2020, more than 2 months later. I told you about the vote of the Board of Directors that governs Windham Hospital, voting unanimously on June 16th, 2020 to terminate OB services. We saw the Dear Patient letter distributed to pregnant patients telling them that for purposes of giving birth, Windham Hospital is closed to them. Those pregnant women were told that they had to travel to Bacchus Hospital in Norwich or another hospital of their choosing in order to deliver babies because Windham Hospital was no longer providing that essential service for the community as of July 1st, 2020. And I proved that the certificate of need was finally filed on September 3rd, 2020, when it was uploaded to the Office of Health Strategies CON portal. We learned that Windham Hospital is part of Hartford Healthcare, the largest healthcare system in the state of Connecticut. We saw firsthand that Hartford Healthcare is very ably represented by an experienced attorney who understands the CON process and has been through its many iterations innumerable times. Additionally, the president of Windham Hospital was told directly by DPH that a CON would be needed to be filed before terminating any inpatient services. All of this evidence proves Windham Hospital knew it needed to file a CON before terminating OB services. Windham Hospital knew they needed to file the CON before terminating the services, but they didn't. And that means they broke the law. In putting on their case, Windham Hospital tried to distract us with alternate theories and extraneous information, but we have to stay laser focused. For our purposes today, it doesn't matter why Windham Hospital decided to terminate obstetric services. It doesn't matter if it was hard to attract healthcare professionals to work in the local community. It doesn't matter that they said it was unsafe to deliver so few babies at Windham Hospital. It doesn't matter what they said they were doing to try to compensate for terminating obstetric services at Windham Hospital. All that matters in this proceeding for the civil penalty to be imposed is that Windham Hospital did, in fact, willfully terminate obstetric services without a CON, period. And now that my job is done, it is up to this tribunal to uphold the lawful imposition of a civil penalty of $65,000. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Attorney Fusco?
Thank you. Thank you, Attorney Chuka, Attorney Manzione, Mr. Lazarus, and other members of the OH staff for your time today. The issues from a legal standpoint are really simple ones. 653 of the general statutes authorizes OHS to impose a civil penalty on a provider only if the agency can prove two things. First, that the provider engaged in an activity that required CON approval under 19A638, here the termination of inpatient or outpatient hospital services. And second, that the provider willfully failed to seek such approval. Both of those elements need to be proven. They need to be proven by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning OHS must have better evidence than the respondent supporting a conclusion that the elements of the civil penalty statute have been met. And OHS has not met the burden under this standard. As Ms. Hanley testified, Windham did not terminate OB services in June of 2020. These services were suspended in the interest of patient safety due to staffing challenges that began years ago, that were managed as best they could in a program that was kept open as long as we could keep it open at the request of the Office of Health Strategy, and they became insurmountable by the summer of 2020. This included the loss of call coverage obstetricians, the loss of those OBs that agreed to sort of extend their call coverage for the first half of 2020, the loss of OB nurses, the loss of the unit coordinator, and an inability to provide consistent neonatal coverage. And this isn't something that could have been solved by cobbling together a group of locums and traveling nurses and saying, hey, let's have an OB program. That would have been an unsafe and ineffective program. Ms. Manzione said the loss of coverage, the loss of doctors doesn't matter. It absolutely matters if you're then compelled to close a service because you can't safely staff it, which is exactly what happened in Milford with their OB program. And it's exactly what happened to Sharon Hospital with their sleep center. You cannot provide a clinical service safely without sufficient staffing, okay? As Ms. Sturdy testified, Windham kept OHS apprised of the circumstances around its OB services. She had discussions in the fall of 2019 when Windham first received notice from OBGYN services that they were terminating their call coverage arrangement effective December 31st. She had additional discussions with OHS in the summer of 2020 before the notice was published. So, regardless of when Mr. Lazarus first knew Windham OB services were being suspended and CON approval to close was the unit permanently would be applied for, OHS knew for the better part of a year. And I think that OHS is misconstruing the conversation that Donna Hanley had with Donna Ortelli at TPH. Donna Hanley explained why that conversation took place, and that Ms. Ortelli was supportive of the fact that there were nurse competency issues given the way that unit was staffed and operating at the time. Ms. Ortelli knew, based on that phone call, that the service was going to be suspended imminently. And she told Ms. Hanley, you do need a CON to terminate it, meaning to close it permanently. She did not tell her, you can't close it tomorrow, you can't close it next week, you can't close it or suspend it till you get a CON. She was aware that it was going to be suspended and simply reminded Ms. Hanley that it could not be closed permanently until the CON was approved. Windham was aware, as OHS is, of the precedent allowing hospitals that cannot adequately and safely staff a service to suspend those services pending CON approval to close. It happened with Milford Hospital's OB under circumstances that closely paralleled the situation in Windham. Windham relied on this precedent, as well as the advice of counsel, in making a good faith determination that the suspension of OB services in June of 2020 did not require CON approval. OHS's failure to respond to its own inquiry, whether they typically respond to these or not, into whether the OB suspension required a CON, further supports Windham's assumption that it didn't require one, right? So whether they respond or not, what's important here is what Windham believed. And Windham believed when an inquiry was initiated and they responded to it and didn't hear back from an administrative agency for a year and a half, that there was no issue. Because if there was an issue, a responsible agency would have responded immediately and taken action. As Ms. Hanley testified, and Ms. Manzione raised these board minutes again, the board minutes are not the indisputable evidence that OHS believes they are. The board approval was a routine matter of corporate governance whereby a parent board authorizes a plan to close a hospital service subject to all necessary approvals, including CON. The board authorization, nowhere in it does it say the services can close immediately. The timeline and approval was discussed. And most importantly, that authorization was required before we could even start this process, before we could file public notice and the application. It doesn't prove that the service was permanently terminated in June of 2020. To the contrary, it was suspended and it remains suspended to date. Based on the foregoing, there's no termination of services. And if there's no termination of services, then the first element of 19A 653 isn't met. Even if OHS determines against clear evidence that a termination did occur, you can't prove that Windham willfully failed to file a CON application, right? Willful failure requires knowledge and an intentional disregard. Windham was unaware at this time that a CON was required to suspend the service. We maintain that it isn't, but assuming you're going to say it is, we were unaware. There was clear agency precedent on this point from prior service suspensions that no CON was required to implement the suspension, assuming, as happened in those cases, a CON was filed for to permanently close the service. The suspension was done out of necessity in the interest of patient safety and due to the inability to staff the unit. And Windham knew that a CON, and this is what Ms. Dirty was saying, like Windham knew that a CON was required to permanently close the unit. And that's why we move forward with the filing. So, talking about whether we failed to file, we published public notice 7 days after the service was suspended and key stakeholders were notified. Like, how can OHS claim that Windham intended to circumvent the CON process when we started the process? Mr. Lasters will tell you, for us, that was the first step in the process within 7 days of our own initiative, okay? OHS didn't call us up and say, we heard you suspended, you better get a CON filed. We were moving forward with the process regardless. There was a plan in place and the only delay was for the notification of those 42 individuals. And I can't imagine that OHS would want to penalize us for holding a virtual public forum in the middle of a global pandemic that OHS requested, that in fact took the place of a public forum that OHS itself was intending to hold in Windham at that time, so that we could address community concerns in our CON filing. And we did that. We did that in a thoughtful manner. And I worked with Ms. Dirty on finalizing that application after the public forum in response to everything that we heard. Those two things, the notification of stakeholders in the forum, were really the only reasons for that 2-month delay that Attorney Manzione referred to. But you can see from the evidence that there was never an intent not to file a CON or to usurp OHS's regulatory authority. I mean, just the opposite. Windham always intended to file a CON, but they were unable to do so before the OB service reached the point that it was no longer safe to operate. So they had to suspend the service. There literally was not the clinical staff to deliver the babies. And it's not as simple as you would think to replace physicians with locums and travelers, right? And so instead they filed their CON application after the service was suspended, which is exactly what happened in Milford. And that matter was resolved expeditiously with no fines. So under the law, without an intent to circumvent the CON statutes, there can't be a willful failure. And without a willful failure, there can be no civil penalty. So, based on the foregoing, I would assert that OHS hasn't met its burden of proof under the statute, that they have not presented the better evidence to show that Windham Hospital did terminate and did willfully fail to seek a CON. And because they haven't met their burden, the civil penalty needs to be rescinded. Now, I will say, and I know this came up in a prior hearing, if against the weight of the clear evidence, OHS determines that the elements of 653 have been met, the hearing officer does have complete discretion to waive the civil penalty.
Attorney Fusco,
In its entirety.
I'm sorry.
You talked about staffing challenges.
I think you froze.
Oh.
I'm
No.
sorry.
Oh,
I think you might have frozen. Are you back?
I am. Yeah, I'm sorry. If you can just back up a sentence or two, that would be helpful.
That's okay. Sorry, maybe we did freeze, but okay. Sorry about
we
that.
must have.
Yeah. I was just saying that, I mean, going back a little bit, that there was, that there was never an intent not to file a CON or usurp the agency's regulatory authority, that without intent to circumvent the CON statutes, there can't be a willful failure. And without a willful failure to seek CON approval, there can't be a civil penalty. I also mentioned that I think based on what I've heard today, I disagree with Attorney Manzione. I think OHS hasn't met its burden of proof under 19A653. I think that they have not presented the better evidence to show that we did terminate or willfully fail to seek a CON. And because they haven't met the burden, the civil penalty has to be rescinded. Sort of alternatively, if you were to decide against the weight of clear evidence that the elements of 19A653 have been met, you as hearing officer do have complete discretion to waive the civil penalty in its entirety due to extenuating circumstances. And here, the extenuating circumstances would include things like staffing challenges that were insurmountable and completely out of the hospital's control. The existence of this clear precedent that Windham was entitled to rely on in suspending the service without a CON, and the need to conduct extensive community outreach on the proposal and to close an OB service during the early months of a COVID-19 pandemic, which everyone forgets. I mean, so much time has passed. This was happening in the spring and summer of 2020. So for these reasons, we respectfully request that the civil penalty be waived or rescinded in its entirety. Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologize for interrupting. I don't know where
problem.
the technology glitch was, but
It's okay.
and I'm sure the court reporter got everything the first time as well, but
It's
I
okay, no
found that
problem.
helpful, so thank you. So with that, I believe we can conclude today's hearing. Thank you to everybody for attending, especially our witnesses, who I know are, well, everybody is extremely busy right now, but especially in the healthcare environment where all the workers are overtaxed. I appreciate your time. And so the hearing is hereby adjourned. The record will remain open to allow for those briefs, but no further evidence other than what is submitted in those briefs will be permitted. So Attorney Fusco, looked like you had a question. Okay.
No, I was just waving till Laura's waving.
Okay.
I just wanted to thank you again. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, I was saying thank you and goodbye. We'll see you soon.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank
Okay.
you.
Hearing Officer Suko, would you like to order the transcript for, say, Monday? To have it screened?
I don't think there's any need for it to be expedited.
Understood.
Do the parties disagree? I think Attorney Manzione may have left already.
I'm fine. Yeah, I think we discussed this yesterday. It's fine. When we get it, we get it.
Okay. All right.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
day.
Take care.